Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Free to Believe. Please welcome the President of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins.
Hello and welcome to the headquarters of the Family Research Council here in Washington, D.C. We're excited to have churches and culture impact teams joining us from every state in the nation today. Today is National Religious Freedom Day, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate our religious freedom than by gathering in churches across the nation for the noble task of preserving what our founders declared to be our first freedom. Our freedom to believe and live according to those beliefs. And not just for ourselves, but for future generations. This Free to Believe webcast is being brought to you by the Family Research Council and Vision America. And joining me today as my co-host is the president of Vision America, Dr. Rick Scarborough. We're going to bring Rick in from our studio upstairs. Rick, welcome.
Pleasure to be with you today, Tony.
You know, Rick, we deal with a lot of public policy and cultural issues here in Washington, D.C., but I would have to say that the greatest threat facing our nation today is this threat to religious freedom. And I want to ask you, am I overstating that issue?
Not at all, Tony. All of our freedoms are underpinned by the freedom to believe, the freedom to practice and carry out our beliefs in the public place. But you are absolutely dead on. That freedom is under assault on a number of quarters.
You have been traveling the country, working with pastors and churches to help them understand, number one, the threat, but number two, what they can do. What do you see happening across America?
I see a quickening among the remnant. I would love to say that the majority of the pastors are getting it now, but the reality is it's still a remnant. But you know, God has never done his work through majorities. He's always worked through a dedicated minority who is willing to stand up, speak up, and refuse to give up. And we are defining that remnant today.
Well, Dr. Scarborough, we're glad to have you partnering with us in this Free to Believe conference. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And we'll be back with you in a minute. And by the way, you look pretty good behind my microphone. That's our radio studio. Don't get too comfortable up there, all right?
I'll try not to.
By the way, we will be taking questions throughout the program from viewers and participants across the nation. Email your questions to questions@frc.org, or you can tweet them to @FRCDC. That's @FRCDC. Our mission today is very simple. We will inform Christians across the nation of the clear and present danger to our freedom to believe and live our lives according to those beliefs as Christians here in America. Now, the media would have you believe that these cases are isolated, that they are few, and they are far between. You will see that that is simply not true. We will inspire. You'll be inspired by the courage of Christians of every age and every walk of life who boldly, with humility, are standing for the freedom to believe in America today. And finally, we hope you and your church will be ignited with passion and with purpose to preserve this vital freedom right there in your community. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote over 50 years ago, he said, "The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state and never its tool," end quote. That should serve as a purpose statement for our culture impact teams as we seek to impact our communities for Jesus Christ. Of course, there are critics today who will wrongfully suggest that by encouraging churches to play a greater role in influencing our government, that we are violating Thomas Jefferson's separation of church and state. Well, how fitting that we address that today, because today is not only our National Religious Freedom Day, it is the 230th anniversary of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which, by the way, was a model for the First Amendment to our Constitution. And anyone want to take a guess who the author of that statute was? Thomas Jefferson. Let's see why this founding father was so instrumental in the freedom to believe.
As Americans, it's important for us to remember our history. First of all, go back and study the history of the First Amendment. The amendments to the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, the very first one that they dealt with was freedom of worship? No, freedom of religion. The First Amendment is about our freedom to believe.
Hi, I'm Dr. Keenan Curitan, and we're here at one of Washington, D.C.'s most iconic sites, the Jefferson Memorial, commemorating the contributions of Thomas Jefferson, founding father and third president of the United States. I have here a pocket constitution. By the way, every American ought to have one and be familiar with it because it's our governing document. And if you know what this says, you won't be fooled by politicians. But this Constitution would have never been ratified without the promise of a Bill of Rights. The first freedom is what? The freedom of religion, right? The freedom to believe. Let me just read it to you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
There's a healthy debate as to what is meant by the establishment of religion, that which is prohibited by the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It may have meant different things to different Americans at this point in history. I think the one thing that we can say they were all agreed on is that it prohibited the institutional establishment of a particular sect or denomination, the kind of arrangement that one found not only in England but virtually all European countries at this time. So there was very much a focus on not having an institutional tie between the powers and the purse of the state and the local church. And so clearly that was among those things that they desired to prohibit.
There were a number of people responsible for religious freedom in America, but the most well-known is Thomas Jefferson. And yet when it comes to the role of faith in public life, Jefferson's views are the subject of the most debate. No matter what you read online or hear in the media or in the classroom, Jefferson's views about God and our religious freedom are right here, etched in stone for all to see. Look at the first panel right over here to my left. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Then he ends up down at the bottom for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, right? We mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Look over here at the second panel. The Declaration of Independence there. This second panel is the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom that Thomas Jefferson drafted in 1777. He starts out by saying, Almighty God has created the mind free. All attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burdens are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion. Who's that? Jesus, right? Hebrews 12. Who's the author and the finisher of our faith, right? And then notice the third panel. Let's read it together. God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we've removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Okay, in 3 of these 4 panels, God is referenced.
Jefferson, throughout his adult life, was a champion of religious liberty. In fact, He was known by Americans as a great champion of religious liberty. Now, we can speculate as to why that is. One thing we do know that his native Central Virginia was a place where there had been great persecution of religious minorities, minority religious sects, in particular the Baptists. And so Jefferson had observed this firsthand. And so one can speculate that he recognized and appreciated the need to protect people in the exercise of their religion.
Now, interestingly, Jefferson, Madison, and their colleagues realized that future lawmakers might try to limit this right, and there was nothing they could do about it except issue this warning, quote, "We are free to declare and do declare that the rights hereby asserted are of the natural rights of mankind, and that if any act shall be hereafter passed to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such act, such law will be an infringement of the natural right." They were warning of what is literally happening today, which is the infringement of our natural God-given right, the freedom to believe. So, Thomas Jefferson championed religious liberty for all Americans and laid the foundation for our First Amendment freedom of religion. I wonder what he and the other founders who fought so hard for our first freedom would think about what is happening today. Modern courts and those who bow to their opinions are now infringing on our natural God-given rights. Our freedom to believe is under fire. What should we do about it? Well, Jefferson's words etched around the top of the rotunda in marble are not a bad place to start. "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man."
Folks, we are free to believe. And when we as Americans willingly sacrifice our liberties, our freedom to believe, we are going to lose our country. The First Amendment is about our freedom to believe.
Tony, as we just saw, Thomas Jefferson thought it very important to write the Statute of Religious Freedom as he did to the Virginia General Assembly, and they passed that on January 16, 1786. I'm particularly proud of that, being a Virginian and having served in that Virginia General Assembly, but it was the document that helped propel us to make sure that we had the First Amendment protections for religious freedom in the Constitution of the United States. We're filing with the United States Congress a Religious Freedom Day resolution. It'll be a bipartisan document, but it will be literally listing all of the great things that our presidents have said since the early 1990s when Religious Freedom Day was actually established, talking about the importance of religious freedom in our country. And one of the things people need to recognize as they look at religious freedom and concepts of religious freedom across the country today is oftentimes we don't hear the voices of faith because they seem to be drowned out in our media today or on the internet or whatever. But every day they see the faces of faith. They see it in organizations like Little Sisters of the Poor, which will literally touch 13,000 people this year who are in poverty because of their faith that drives them to do that. And yet they're challenged in that faith because the federal government's trying to make them do things that are against the very core and nature of their faith. That's why you saw over 200 members of Congress joining an amicus curiae brief to try to make sure the United States Supreme Court in March of this year upholds their faith and their freedom. So Tony, thank you for fighting to make sure we continue to have that freedom to believe in our country, because since the beginning of our history, it's been a vitally important part of what makes America, America.
By the way, I want to remind you that we will be taking your questions. We'll have some question and answer periods coming up. If you have a question, Please email us questions at frc.org if you'd like to tweet those questions at FRCDC. Well, we have just heard about the freedom of religion, the freedom to live our lives according to our Christian beliefs that our founders enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. But despite the fact that it is in the Constitution, we are increasingly seeing everyday people of every walk of life who have had their religious freedom threatened. Here to highlight a number of these cases is my friend Matt Staver, who is the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here, Tony.
Matt, I first want to say thank you for all the great work that Liberty Counsel does on behalf of religious freedom in this country.
Well, thank you, Tony. What you're doing here through Family Research Council across this country and here in the nation's capital is unparalleled. And we certainly stand with you because America would be a different place if it weren't for FRC.
Well, thank you. And Matt is one of the great legal minds of our day, and he's argued before the Supreme Court everywhere and has been one of the chief defenders, along with a number of our other allies, for religious liberty. What I'd like to do, Matt, is, you know, the media would like to say these cases are isolated, that it's one or two people here or there who have a Jesus chip on their shoulder. But what I want to show by highlighting some of these cases is the fact that these are people of every walk of life who are simply trying to live their lives according to their faith, which, as we just heard, is what the founders guaranteed us.
No question about it. And on the freedomtobelieve.com, you have lots of stories, and those are just the tip of the iceberg. We certainly wouldn't even have time in 4 hours to catalog all those situations.
Well, let's jump right into it. What I'd like to do, we do have a website that catalogs a number of these cases. It's not exhaustive. There are many more, but you'll get a sense of it. freetobelieve.org. And here's a number of the cases that we find up on this website. And I'd like to, Matt, I'd like to go through a few of these cases and get you to describe the case. We don't have a lot of time, but we'll try to get through as many as we can. I want to start first with Kim Davis. Anybody heard of Kim Davis? Well, Matt is her attorney. And Kim Davis, let's take a look at that case. Kim, tell us about Kim.
Well, Kim felt called by God to run for this office of clerk of Rowan County. And so she was there because she had prayed and felt God had put her in that situation. And then she was confronted with a choice. Does she sacrifice her freedom to believe and then issue marriage licenses that authorize same-sex marriage with her name and authority and title? Or does she not? And so she chose to stand for Scripture and for her right to believe. And she was put in jail for 6 days, unbelievably, only 2 months after that Supreme Court opinion on June 26, 2015.
In fact, I visited her in jail while Matt was there with her. Now, just to be very clear, because the media has spun this case, Matt, she was not refusing to allow her office to issue marriage licenses. She was simply saying, I don't want my name on the license because it violates my faith, and I become a party to that agreement.
That's exactly right. You know, she's not just a processing clerk on marriage licenses. She is the authority. It is under her name. It is under her title. She could not bring herself to issue a marriage license that conflicts with God's definition of marriage. So she asked for one simple accommodation: remove my name and title. That's all I ask for. But instead of accommodating her faith, which they could have done, which another governor, Matt Bevin, has done now through executive order, they threw her in jail for 6 days.
Yeah, and that's the key point there. We have a new governor in Kentucky who accommodated her freedom to believe. That's a good story. Let's move on with the Kim Davis one. And let's go to another one. It's not just elected officials, but we have here a football coach. Let's take a look at Joe Kennedy and the case involving him. He's a football coach up in Washington State.
Washington State. In 2008, he watched the Facing the Giants movie, and there, of course, there's that scene where the coach goes to the center field and prays. And so from 2008 till the present, he went to the center of the field at the end of the game and prayed. He wasn't asking anyone to join him. Sometimes players would join him on the other side of the team. They would just come together and pray. And the school authorities said you can't pray at all at any time when you're around these players.
It wasn't over the PA system.
No.
It was simply taking a knee at midfield and praying to himself.
Silently at the end of a game. And so they said you couldn't even pray, not only at the midfield, but you couldn't even bow your head. So here he was put in a situation, what happens if his player gets hurt on the field? everyone obviously would want to pray. He wouldn't even in that situation be able to bow his head and pray. And as a result of that, he was suspended from school in his teaching, in his coaching
and
position.
this case is currently still being litigated.
Still being
I said
litigated.
pray to himself. He was praying by himself
praying
to God.
That's right.
That was the problem. It was praying to God. All right. Let's, just so you don't know that it's not just people in professional positions, it's even students. Here's a case of, let's see, where is, oh, here we go. This is Angela Hildebrand. Let's take a look at this case. Angela was a valedictorian in Texas, a red state.
Yeah, in a state you wouldn't expect something like this to happen. She was the valedictorian. As a valedictorian, she had the right to be able to sit on that platform and stand and give a speech, and she wanted to pray. And a litigation ensued, and the federal judge in that case, and this is unbelievable, but the federal judge told her that if she prayed, she would be thrown in jail. I mean, that's the unbelievable situation that this valedictorian faced over praying
And
at
think
her
about
graduation.
it, an 18-year-old girl faced with the choice of exercising her freedom to believe and going to jail, and she chose her faith. Now, there's a good story here. The judge at the last minute backed down. But actually, I tell her story in this the book No Fear, which is a story of a lot of young people today who are standing up for their faith. An amazing story of Angela. All right, let's move along here, Matt. There's several more cases I want to get to. I want to go to Aaron and Melissa Klein. Let's take a look at that case. They are a couple that we've actually worked a lot with. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Sweet Cakes by Melissa. You know, Melissa wants to be able to participate and use her artistic talents, which she believes it's God-given, and this is her ministry, to be able to make the most important moment for husband and wife during marriage. And so two lesbians came to her, and they wanted her to bake a cake for a same-sex ceremony. And she said that that would conflict with her religious beliefs. You would think that they would go to another baker. No. They filed a complaint. The state came after them, fined them $135,000. And toward the end of 2015, they literally went into her bank account and pulled out the $135,000 from Aaron and Melissa Klein.
Yeah.
They were at Value Voter Summit, and I was there when they were there, and when she was talking about how this was her God-given mission, she began to bawl on the stand, and this is the victim. Aaron and Melissa Klein, and they're not the only ones.
Well, and just to underscore the consistency of their faith, they were one time approached about doing a divorce cake to celebrate a divorce, and they refused because the way they honor God's institution of marriage. So there's consistency here, but yet the government has not only refused to recognize their right, has literally persecuted them in that case. Well, let's go back. Another case you're very familiar with in the state of Florida is an elected official, a sheriff. Let's take a look at the sheriff, Sheriff Grady Judd.
Yeah, Sheriff Grady Judd is a Christian. He spoke at a Sunday service at First Baptist Church at the mall, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation complained and said that you shouldn't be saying anything religious and certainly shouldn't be preaching in your uniform. Well, he wears his uniform all of the time. He's a well-recognized, very well-respected elected sheriff. And he does his job exceptionally well. So basically what they're trying to say is if you're a Christian, you can't be a Christian in that uniform.
Right.
You have to put it aside.
So essentially, and this is not just the sheriffs, it's not just the coaches. What they're saying, if you're going to step into public life, you have to leave your faith behind.
You have to literally like take it off like a robe and leave it at home and walk out into the secular world.
So what then becomes the guiding values?
Well, you know what the guiding values are secularism, and what you end up
That's
with
what
is
this is
hostility toward people of faith.
All right, Matt, we are almost out of time here, but I got to get to some very important cases dealing with our nation's military. Under this administration, religious freedom in our military has been under unbelievable assault. We have Chaplain Wes Motter, who is another case, an amazing story of Chaplain Motter.
Yeah, 19-year veteran, and this individual, just 5 months before he was disciplined and removed from his position, was called the best of the best. And he was working with the nuclear division on the submarines, and he had an assistant that was asking him questions about homosexuality. So he would share based upon the questions that were being asked. He got reported, and then he got removed because of intolerance, although he was recently referred to as the best of the best as a Navy chaplain.
Good ending to this case because hundreds of thousands of Americans responded on his behalf. The Navy backed off. He has been reinstated and is actually up for promotion now because Americans stood for his freedom to believe.
Well, in FRC, you led the effort in getting the petitions out there. You had over 100,000, I don't know what the final number was, but it was a lot of petitions. And so when people stood up for his rights, ultimately some good things happened.
A very good point, Matt, and I want to underscore that with those connecting with us across the country. When we send out, Matt, other organizations send out petitions. In this particular case, as we always do, we deliver those petitions, but I personally took, I don't know, 150,000 signed petitions to the Chief of Chaplains at the Pentagon on behalf of Chaplain Motter. And today, he is back in his role of ministering to the spiritual needs of our men and women in the military today. So Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Well, folks, if you think it's just in these isolated incidents that we see this attack on religious freedom, I want you to see that it's actually on our college campuses in a more intense way than you might even imagine, even on religious campuses. Let's go to Dr. Rick Scarborough, who's going to lead us into an understanding of what's happening on our college campuses. Rick?
Well, thank you, Tony. We have here in the studio Dr. Everett Piper. He has been the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, a great Christian university in the northern part of Oklahoma, in Bartlesville, Oklahoma to be exact, since 2002. And I have been in a number of venues over the last 18 months where he was either the keynote speaker or one of the main speakers. And I'll tell you, Dr. Piper, I've become a fan. This man seated to my left is a modern-day Daniel. He doesn't flinch. He's a man of great courage. Dr. Piper, I know that your school initiated a lawsuit under your direction against Health and Human Services, Obamacare to be exact. And when you responded to the community's question, why is our university being involved in a lawsuit, you laid out 9 specific reasons why that lawsuit was important. And I might add, they chose Constitution Day in 2013 to lay out this case. I'm sure that was carefully chosen. But Dr. Piper, share with our listeners exactly why you're engaged in this lawsuit and specifically address some of these issues you raise that are often overlooked.
Right. Well, we have filed a lawsuit against Healthcare and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, the Obama administration. And the reason for that lawsuit is because we disagree with the government's presupposition or presumption that it can impose its definition of religion upon us and require us to succumb to their definition. So in other words, what they're saying is that we're going to establish a new definition of what religious liberty is with regard to this requirement for abortifacient drugs. And we're going to tell these Christian universities that they have to include that abortifacient drug within their health care package. We're obviously saying, no, we're an evangelical Christian institution. We are grounded in a biblical worldview. All the employees that work for us are pro-life by definition. And like the Little Sisters of the Poor, which are co-litigants with us in this particular lawsuit, we have a religious conviction. We believe that we should preserve the dignity of the human being from conception to completion, so we don't want that product. Now, here's the interesting thing, Rick. This is a pro-woman position. We're saying the woman should be granted the dignity to decide what contraception she wants in her health care and what contraception she doesn't want in her health care. Who in the world thinks that the government should be telling a bunch of Catholic nuns at the Little Sisters of the Poor that they have to avail themselves of contraception?
Yeah, you can't make this kind of stuff up.
No. The assumption that these Catholic nuns want the drug, will use the drug, is absurd. Also, it diminishes their dignity and suggests they're not smart enough as women to decide what kind of products they want in their healthcare package. So this argument that we're presenting is actually an argument for the dignity of the woman, the right of the woman to make her own decisions in what healthcare products she wants or doesn't want.
Now, you also mentioned in the article I read that this whole idea of of abortifacia and demanding that the culture distribute such to women is a further advancing of the objectification of women. Talk about that.
Right. Again, how insulting is it to suggest that women can't make their own choices when it comes to contraception? Catholics should be able to make decisions consistent with their Catholic vows and beliefs. Evangelical believers should be able to make the same. The argument to the contrary is really objectifying the woman and suggesting that she isn't intelligent enough. And really our culture today has created this argument that the human being is an object rather than an ontological reality, that the human being can be constructed in conjunction with desires and inclinations and fantasies and fabrications and make-believe, rather than a man and a woman being an objective reality, a biological fact, a scientific empirical thing that exists and should be honored within that evidence. And we're the ones being accused of being anti-science?
Well, it makes the young lady on a college campus the plaything of the boy who is completely detached from any kind of ownership if there is a baby conceived. It seems to me that we have put women as objects of gratification to the male species in this case, or in the more radical cases where they're forced to participate in aborting the child once it's conceived.
And here's evidence to your point. Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. What's on the cover of a sports magazine in that particular issue?
Excellent.
A female body. So the point is, this is an object of recreation rather than a human being that has ontological dignity, not something to enjoy as an object of sport.
Now, in the event you lose the lawsuit, how far are you willing to go to sustain your convictions as an institution and as the leader of that institution?
I really think that's a critical question of our time. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless." Wilberforce fought in the face of slavery for 40 years on the British Parliament until he finally prevailed. If Winston Churchill would have backed down because of fear of failure, we'd live in a very different world today. Wesley argued for justice, biblical justice, in the streets of London because of the degradation of the human being, the degradation of the woman, the degradation of the child, the dumbing down of the individual, but nothing but the sum total of inclinations, if you will, which we're suffering today. We will fight until the end.
Dr. Piper, we're about to run out of time here, but I want people to know how they can follow your ministry and receive, I know you do a weekly blog and other things. Tell the folks how they can stay in touch with you.
www.okwu.edu, and follow me on Twitter. It's Dr. Everett Piper, DREVERETTPIPER.
I want to encourage you to follow up on that because I do get his weekly emails and mail-outs, and this man is becoming a real champion of faith, one we need to pray for and support. Tony, back to you.
All right, Rick, thank you. Dr. Piper, thank you so much. You guys stand by. We're going to have some questions for you in just a moment. And again, let me remind you to send your questions. This is interactive. We want to hear from you. You can email us your questions at frc.org, or you can tweet them at FRCDC. All right, the next gentleman I've asked to weigh in on the threats to religious freedom are David and Jason Benham. Now, you may have heard of the Benham brothers, who were on their way to a primetime TV show, but HGTV pulled the plug on their program, and it was because of, yes, you guessed it, their religious beliefs. Let's listen.
Hey, thanks, Tony, for having us. It's such an honor for us with some of our kids, not all of them, to participate in Free to Believe. You know, the freedom to believe means nothing if we don't have the courage to stand up for our beliefs. And it's vital that we stand strong as dads, as moms, for the freedoms that we have in America. You know, we've got our kids around us, and what we discovered when we were kids is that the things that we caught from our parents were far more impactful in our lives than the things that we're taught. So we're doing everything that we can to stand boldly so that our kids and hopefully our grandkids and our great-grandkids will stand with courage, because now, more than ever, in the culture, we need to stand strong, not just for religious liberty, but so that our kids will see us standing strong, and then they will take a stand as well.
Ronald Reagan gave a great quote one time, kiddos, and he said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our kids in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to you to do the same. Or one day, we'll spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like to live in the United States where men were free." We want you to experience those same freedoms, and we want your children and your children's children to experience the same freedoms. So you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna take a stand, along with Tony Perkins, the Family Research Council, and by the way, everybody look at the camera. If we could see Tony Perkins right now, kiddos, he is the most handsome man on the planet. Everybody give a thumbs up to Tony Perkins. All right, guys, you're now free. Go, have fun, enjoy yourselves.
You're free to play.
Free to play, but soon you'll be free to take a stand. One of the things that we find as Jason and I are traveling and speaking around the country is that a lot of people, they say, well, I believe these things, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to lose a job, or I don't want to, even if it's a pastor, lose my ministry, or maybe a politician, I don't want to lose my position of influence. And that's where we really come in and say, you know what? For the first time in American history, believing and exercising our freedom to believe may actually cost us something. You have to recognize that there's that inner fear in all of us. And that fear is rooted in the fear of man and a man-pleasing spirit. That's the spirit of the age. And we're so afraid to offend man that we are actually, in essence, offending God. So we have to be willing to take a stand.
And this is where parenting comes in. My brother and I got a chance to watch my dad and mom. We got a chance to live in their home for 18 years before we went off to college. It wasn't the things that they taught us that we remember most. It's the things that we caught from them and the way that they lived their lives.
Well, when we were kids, our dad was faithful to go to abortion clinics and minister. He wasn't one of those guys that was yelling and screaming and all of this, but he was a minister to these mothers. And Jason and I would see mothers just weeping and say, thanks for being here. I'm going to choose life. We grew up with this. And then when we got to Charlotte, North Carolina, Jason and I got a call from our dad. It's because at the time, our dad was street preaching at one of the busiest intersections in our city. And a lot of the city leaders did not like it. So they put together this little ordinance called a parade ordinance, which basically in the ordinance, if 5 or more people are there, you have to apply for a permit. And my dad said, that is wrong. We have the freedom to preach. So I need you and your brother to recruit 3 other guys and meet me out at the intersection. So we show up to this intersection at 5 o'clock. It was hysterical. Dad had a little sound system set up. It was just him standing there. And Jason and I come rolling up. Our 3 buddies pull in the parking lot and they come rolling up. So now there's 6 of us. We're breaking the ordinance. Dad said, okay guys, here's the deal. I've already called the police on myself. As soon as they start rolling up, I'm going to start preaching. They are obligated to give us all a warning. They're going to warn you guys, you're welcome to just leave. And he said, and then when they get to me, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to keep preaching, and they're either going to find me or take me to jail. I don't know what they're going to do. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sue them. And then I'm going to get this ordinance struck down, and I'm going to protect you and your children, my grandchildren, with their freedom to believe and their freedom to live out their beliefs. And sure enough, 2 police cars pull by, and the officers come up, and the first officer goes to Jason and says, you're in violation of such and such an ordinance. We need to ask you to leave. And Jason just, okay, outie. And Jason left like a sissy.
Don't you judge me.
Then they got to me, and I left too. And then they got to our next buddy, and he left. But the other 2 buddies that we had stood there and were just like, no, I can't leave. I'm going to stand right here and support Reverend Benham. They said, okay, fine. They got to my dad. My dad stopped preaching for just a few minutes, listened to them, and just said, okay. And he just started preaching again. It was hysterical. They issued $5,000 fines to all 3 of them. My dad then took those 3 fines, sent it to his attorney. Dad's attorney then sends an official letter to the city and said, basically, what you've done is wrong, and we're now filing suit. They filed a lawsuit. Anyway, literally within a couple of weeks,
The city reached out to Dad's attorneys and says, we're dropping it all. We just don't want you guys to pursue this. And I remember after all the dust settled, Dad said, you know what? Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep it resist them. When it came time to taking our freedoms away, it took a man to say, no, I'm going to stand and resist.
And what a father does is, if he's out camping with his kid and a wolf comes along, he's not trying to give the wolf a steak just to try to make it happy. He's going to deal with that wolf. That's what a father does. He provides and he protects.
He's not also trying to converse with the wolf, to find common ground with the wolf. He doesn't do that. And in John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus was clear how you're supposed to treat wolves. And then later on in the book of Acts, Paul even spoke and he said to the Christians, he's talking to Christian leaders here, there are going to be wolves that are going to come in and try to devour the flock. And so what we've got to understand as spiritual leaders, as political leaders, as just family leaders, we have to be willing to recognize wolves. And those are the ones that want to strip and take away the God-given freedoms that we have. And we have to confront them and not be afraid and not try to find common ground with them. We say, no, God gives us our freedom. We have the freedom to believe and exercise those beliefs. And if you try to take those beliefs, I am going to resist you. The role of government is to restrain evil that good may flourish, or to punish evil and praise those who do right. What happens when government now, or God's people pull out of government? Now government flips those around and they begin to punish good and praise evil. The Apostle Paul taught young Timothy, he said that the church is the pillar and support of the truth. We are salt and light. Jesus says we are salt and light, but if the salt loses its saltiness, it's fit for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled under the feet of men.
But if church is something that you are, and testimony is something that you live, then being the church wherever you are is what's most important. And so that's why we say that plumbers, preachers, politicians, practitioners, whoever it is, stay-at-home moms, be the church right there. Be the church. And what we like to say is the church is family on mission. Speaking of one practical thing, is the FRC's cultural impact teams.
I was getting
in
there.
our church. You're going to talk about that? I want to talk about that.
No, because I like it.
I want Tony to be impressed with me.
No, Tony, you'll be impressed with me.
Our own church is doing one of FRC's cultural impact teams where they've got, I mean, it's basically how to impact your culture in a box. It's the coolest thing ever. And so that you simply get a person or a family or whoever in your church that can actually run the thing, and it teaches them how to get your church engaged in the culture. There is no better missionary that needs to be supported than that person who's running the FRC's cultural impact.
Who is it in your church that really has a heart as a missionary to that realm of society? Government is a mission field. Government is a minister of God. And if the true ministers don't go to that mission field, then that no longer will be a minister of God. It'll actually be a minister of Satan, because it'll flip around what is good and what is evil. That's why we've got to be involved.
This presidential election coming up in 2016 is so important. If you don't vote, you're getting this.
Well, the thing is,
this.
Well, the thing is in the past, stop for a second. No, the church, we've got to get back to our original mission and vision and purpose. We are the pillar and support of the truth in every area of society. We need to lead with brokenness, live with compassion, be willing to live out this faith, bring value to our city, stop building ourselves so much, and start sowing back into our nation. You can say, oh, well, that's just politics. It's dirty. Well, yeah, politics is the art of compromise. It's the struggle, it's the power struggle. But your civic duty and your civic responsibility as a Christian is to restrain evil that good may flourish for your children and your children's children, and for government to truly be a minister of God.
But if we take a stand as moms and as dads, then our kids, Lord willing, God will come through and our kids will be protected. So thank you, Tony, for the opportunity for us to speak to this conference, Freedom to Believe. We appreciate you, your ministry, everything that you have to do. What do you?
And right now in 2016, we are free to believe. Let's keep it that way for many years to come.
Well, how about those Benham brothers? I'm glad they're on our side, right? By the way, they mentioned the Culture Impact Kit. If you don't have one already in your church, you'd like to find out more about how you can get one of these Culture Impact teams set up in your church, simply go to cultureimpact.org and you can find out about how you can get the Culture Impact team in a box right there at the website. All right, we're going to take some of your questions now. I'm going to ask Matt Staver to join me. We've got Rick up in the studio, and we've had a few questions come in. And Matt, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to start with you. It says, my church hasn't yet experienced any cases like the ones you've just mentioned, earlier we talked about. What is the likelihood that something will happen in the near future?
Absolutely 100%. There's no question about it. Every single person, particularly on the issue of human sexuality and the same-sex marriage agenda, will have to make a decision. Every pastor, every church, tax exemption, property tax exemption, use of your facilities, zoning, all of these different areas are going to be affected.
So it's not really if, it's simply when.
Just a matter of when. There's no question about that.
I mean, as we saw earlier where we had football coach, we had a student, we had a sheriff. I mean, just every walk of life. There's no area that's immune from this attack.
You know, unlike abortion, which we've had since 1973, and we've slaughtered 57 million children, until the recent Obamacare mandate, we haven't been forced to be complicit in it.
Yeah.
We've been able to essentially ignore it oftentimes. But this issue of the definition of marriage and the so-called LGBT agenda is very coercive. They're not content with you being silent. They want you to be participating and promoting.
But it's not limited to just that issue. As
No,
we've seen
it's
with
not.
these other groups, these atheist groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, have aggressively been targeting communities, small communities, limited budgets, going in saying, if you allow students to pray or you do this, we're going to sue you, and a lot of times they capitulate.
No question. Whatever it is in your community, directly your church is going to be affected, but your community is going to be affected. From the Freedom from Religion Foundation to the ACLU, they're sending out letters intimidating small towns to stop prayer at football games, to stop invocations, to stop any kind of display of nativity scenes, and it goes on and on and on. It really is a bulldozer to any of our religious faith and heritage.
And here's the good news. And I want to remind you of this, folks, out there across the country, your church, you hear something in your community, let us know. Because there are attorneys and organizations like Matt's, like Liberty Counsel and others that are willing, ready, and able to defend you in those communities. And 9 times out of 10, we win when we simply stand up and fight.
Yeah, if we don't show up, we're going to lose automatically. But if we're there, we can certainly have a very good chance of winning.
All right, Rick, I'm going to bring you in here. A question we had come in says, and as a former pastor and one who actually led your congregation in engagement in the community because what was happening in your schools, it says, what are some ways a church can help one of its members that has their freedom to believe infringed upon?
Well, what they've got to do is rally around that member and not only pray for them, and I don't want to say that in a way that makes it sound like that's insignificant. They must be praying for them, but they need to also, when necessary, step up with financial assistance.
Yes.
Satan right now is literally having his day in our country. The word that Matt said just a moment ago, intimidation, is his chief tool. But I want to remind all the believers out there that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. There are multiple groups like Matt Staver's Liberty Counsel and others that will come alongside and assist with the litigation if it calls for that. But we need to also be willing to open our checkbooks and write big checks when necessary so that these believers are not isolated or standing alone.
Right.
That empowers them to fight the good fight.
That's a great word of encouragement because, folks, that's exactly what happens. Someone gets attacked, they feel isolated, and people begin to back away from them. And, you know, the weight of that, the emotional, and not to mention the financial in some cases. So, absolutely, we need to rally around them, support them financially, support them emotionally. And when we stand together, when we lock arms and we stand for that first freedom, when we stand for the truth, we'll prevail and we'll reach and encourage others. Matt, thanks so much for being here today and being a part of this. Folks, keep the questions coming in. We're going to have some more times of Q&A. Again, questions at frc.org, or you can tweet them in at FRCDC. But now what we're going to do, this is where you get a chance to start making this real. This is our first 15-minute discussion working group, whatever you want to call it, coffee and donuts, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Now, your facilitator has questions and will lead in the discussion. So feel free to mute the program here, so feel free to believe and to mute. But if you don't have a working group where you're at, stay tuned. In about 60 seconds, we have our own working group that will begin the discussion, and you can simply join with them. I'll be back in about 15 minutes.
Happened in your world?
It's really striking, Randy. Like if that happened to us or to someone we love in our church, I think I would feel over what my rights are, what the boundaries are.
Well, what Tony said at the very end is you don't have to feel alone. That's what we need to communicate to our people in the conversations that we have. And one of the things we need to do is bring others in the body to this team and work together in this, because we're not working alone. It may feel like that, as we have seen out there, but we're not. So how can we help push this information out and encourage others to join us and be a part of the solution?
Well, I think starting a culture impact team in a church is key. If a church has a culture impact team, then people are educated about where to go. Our family had an instance happen probably about 10 years ago where my niece was suspended from school for wearing a t-shirt that communicated something that was antithetical to what the school believed. And my brother called me right away and said, what do I do? Where do we turn? Because he didn't know at that point. And fortunately in California, we had Pacific Justice Institute who was willing to deal with these smaller cases. They're not all huge like these stories that we hear.
So if your brother wasn't able to call you or have a conversation with you, and knowing what you knew about these other organizations that come in to help, then he'd be in a quandary here. Do you see that going on here? That we can be that source of information connected with other organizations, like we've heard here, that can bring information to us. So what are the things we do as a team to help raise up levels of understanding in our people?
I think one of the things for me is just being informed. I know a few years ago you'd hear these stories, and there's so much going on in the news. You're like, what do I believe? What's really going on out there? And for me, I think a light bulb moment was I had the opportunity to meet the clients who were talked about a $135,000 fine. And when I shook Aaron Klein's hand, it was like, wow, these are real people. It's not, a lot of times when it happens, it's on the other side of that TV screen. It's like, oh, that's something out there. And just realizing these are real people. And so having those stories, for me, I was like, wow, who else is this happening to? So being informed, I think knowing what is going on.
Well, we can work with the pastor so he can help us promote meetings like this gathering, so we can grow this team in our church. And then in the conversations, other people get involved in that, hear about the resources, information that is out there, and they in turn can push out and be eyes and ears, so that when situations like this occur in our churches, which they're occurring more and more as we have seen, we can be quick to bring help to them, encouragement, and then quell the situation by tapping the resources of these organizations, the legal help that we're needing more and more today, to stand people up and encourage people to stay in the fight, to stand in the fight and stay in the fight.
I think it's helpful to be proactive and to educate, talk about how lives are affected, devastated, but then how God brought a solution in, kind of like a case study, so that our congregation understands, and then we can share that knowledge even further outside our walls, because this is happening.
When these stories are told, it awakens things that people usually walk right by. But now we're bringing awareness to these. Hearing these stories now we're able to see what's going on around us and point them out so we can be proactive.
Right.
And that's the big deal. We get caught when we're reactive. We don't know
Right.
what to do.
Can't do
and they seem to take us out, if you will. But if we can be proactive.
I think what Tony said, that we need to stand together.
Yes.
That it's key that we all take our stand and that we support each other.
Right.
That we have to be cohesive, not just branching out and everybody on their own, but whether it's the Kleins or these other cases that we've heard that are big issues, or whether it is those smaller issues, we need to just stand together.
Right. You know, and that's where we can work closely with the pastor as we communicate the importance of this team, and then the reach we can be, not just in the body here, but also reach out into the community.
That's right.
And help others know what these situations are that we're being faced with and will face in the days to come. What else are you all seeing? Have you run into any other situations like this from those that you...
Well, something I would say is I have a number of friends, because of where they work, that this hasn't happened to yet, but because of their occupations, they're wondering if it will. And
Right.
so getting to what you're saying, standing together, I think there's a big difference between feel like you're going through something hard and going through something alone. Knowing you have support is huge.
You know, again, back to supporting the pastor, which his team is so critical in
Right.
doing. With his plate full of issues that he has to deal with, we can alert him to these arenas and help him communicate to the people the place that they have to stand, encourage them to stand because of the support that is around them.
Sure.
We need to teach, you know, they're called millennials now, I think, the 18 to 35-year-old group. I don't think those folks understand that this is real, that this is a concern, that people are going to be just rolled right over.
Right.
Randy, I've had really great conversations at, talking to some of the young people that I know, several of whom have photography businesses and work, for instances, with weddings, and pointing to a website like Free to Believe that has the stories on it of other people who have faced persecution elsewhere, so that they'll understand what could happen and be prepared for the responses that they might get.
Yeah, we've got to get that out. freetobelieve.com. Let the people go there, read the story.
Right.
Also, you know, where do we go for help? You mentioned it earlier, Debbie, about Pacific, but there's the Alliance Defending Freedom, there's Liberty Council, there's Liberty Institute. There are allied attorneys in our community and communities across the country, for that matter, that can be alerted quickly, that we can tap for help in situations like this. And so we need to communicate that out to the people as well. Have that available at the booth that we have in the back as we give information out to the people. But, you know, I think our role, one of our important roles, is to have these conversations with folks and continue to invite others into this conversation.
You know, it's not always easy to have those conversations with friends or family, but if your brother hadn't known that you knew about these issues, he may not have known where to turn.
Right.
True. And education, I think, is the key, which is kind of what it comes back to. People have to be educated about the issues and know that others have gone through it and that they are not standing alone. And then again, where to turn. What do they do when they need to know that someone else is there to help them?
Yeah.
And I love that website. We've said it a couple times, but the Free to Believe website, because like you said, the next generation, I'm a millennial, and I'm looking at what is religious freedom going to look like a couple decades from now. And when I've taken people to that website, because a lot of times you hear one or two stories and you're like, oh, you know, maybe people are trying to make something up that's not really there. But when you go to that website and you see the stories and the faces, you realize this is a trend. This is not an isolated incident. And I think when you see that trend, especially young people, when they see the stories, they're like, we don't want to live in a society that's going to be like that a couple decades from now, or that's even more widespread.
So let's work with the pastor. Let's get a time with him to, you know, engage in this conversation. Let him know what we have learned and come to understand. And then let's set sights on another meeting where we can get his help promoting the meeting, and let's have conversations with those around us, and begin to invite them to this meeting so that we can see this team grow, because we need everybody's help here. And you know, those in the congregation, the crosshairs are on them, like the Kleins. And the florist up in Washington, the photographer in New Mexico, those stories on freetobelieve.com, they're in the crosshairs, those sitting in the congregation. So we can be a help to them in being proactive and getting them coverage and protection.
We need to help them so that they stand strong, that they don't feel silenced or bullied because they want to, you know, stand up in their faith.
Yeah, that's an important term. Obviously, it's been thrown around. It's thrown around all the time. Is bullying. They can get a hold of that real quickly, and they can see then, as we tell the story, that the Kleins were bullied. The florist in Washington was bullied. The photographer, and on it goes. And even the Benham brothers that we just heard about, they were bullied. And it was a great encouragement to see their story and how they stood strong and what God has done in their world to get his message out and encourage us to stand as well.
I like that idea because Scripture gives us so many instances where others in our faith have stood strong throughout history from the beginning of time. And so that encouragement for us now in this day and age to stand strong.
Well, you're right. And that is the narrative of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the face of being taken out.
Thank you for saying that, because I've talked to people about these kinds of things, and they always say, but God is in control. Well, yes, he is. But like you just said, there are people in the Bible that God called forth to stand their ground and to be an example.
That's right.
We've got to do that.
That's right.
We can't sit back and be quiet.
That's right. And we don't know what effect our stand will have on other people around us. I think we need to be careful not to think that this is about us, but to realize that there are people around us who may also be suffering.
So let's continue the conversation. That's what our role is as a cultural impact team in the church. Let's continue to do that. Bring others to it. This is great. We need to continue this.
Okay.
So, next meeting is.
I have a question as we're talking, because we don't have a culture impact team. You do? You too?
All right. Welcome back from your working groups. Please continue to enjoy your coffee and donuts if you have the ability to have them. But anyway, hope you found that very helpful. First of a number of working groups we're going to do here today, because you know it's great to hear all these stories. It's great to have the information, but what are you going to do with it at home? All right, and that's the point. All right, some breaking news I want to that you may not be aware of that has just come to our attention. Something that relates to the freedom to believe, and as churches and Christians around the nation have been praying for years, literally. Pastor Saeed Abedini has been reportedly released from Iran. As you'll recall, a couple of years ago, we had his wife at our Values Voter Summit, and we've had Christians around the world literally praying for him. I'm not going to get into the commentary on the particular case, but prayers have been answered, and we need to continue to pray that America will defend the freedom to believe, not only for every American, but for every person on the face of the earth, because religious freedom is not just an American right, it is a human right. All right, as we enter the 2016 presidential election, if you're wondering how the presidential candidates stack up on religious liberty, we have some exclusive video responses to share with you, courtesy of FRC Action. In fact, we invited hopefuls from both sides of the political aisle to answer this question. What do you see as the greatest threat to religious freedom in America today, and what will you do as President of the United States to protect our first freedom? Watch this.
I advise everyone to vote That's the only way you can get your voice heard, because that's how we express the freedom.
If you don't vote, then you're giving up your right to complain about the outcome of any election.
Well, I didn't vote, and I regret that I didn't vote.
That's why we founded this country, is that we can vote, and that's one of our rights as citizens.
You may not be interested in politics, but politics sure is interested in you.
Our first freedom is not just a freedom to be able to quietly pray to your Creator in your home or in your church or in your synagogue. It is to be able to act on your sense of consciousness, informed by your faith, to be able to feed the hungry and take care of the poor, to deal with the disabled, and many other things. That requires action, requires acting on conscience. And when the federal government tries to impose regulations on top of that, they are wrong. As President of the United States, I will do everything in my power to protect the first freedom, our First Amendment. Religious conscience, religious liberty is one of the hallmark parts of our liberty as a nation. We also need to be conscious of the fact that the United States has a role to play to protect religious freedom, particularly religious minorities all around the world. But for us, who? Who will be on the side of those that are being persecuted, beheaded, and killed because of their faith? So whether it's at home or abroad, the United States President needs to be a strong advocate of religious liberty. Thank you all very much, and God bless.
I believe the greatest threat to religious freedom in America today is secular progressivism and the way that it tends to try to make everything equivalent. There is no right, there is no wrong, there is no standard. And this is particularly evident in the case where the Supreme Court decided that gay marriage should be, in fact, the law of the land, not taking into consideration the fact that there are millions of people who believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, and it is religiously based. We, unfortunately, have allowed the secular progressive agenda to run away with the court system, and our defense is the Congress, but they must have a backbone. They must enact legislation very soon that will protect the religious rights of Americans. As president, I will encourage and work with Congress to make sure that we protect all of our religious freedoms. The First Amendment is absolutely critical to the well-being of our nation in the future.
The right to freely worship the Lord God Almighty with all of our hearts, minds, and soul is fundamental to who we are as a nation. Yet today, we face an unprecedented attack on our first freedom from an aggressive secular state that seeks to push faith out of the public square entirely. Political elites have adopted a view of the world that, like the old kings and queens, they have the authority to give and take away our rights. They wrongly assume that with one sweeping court decision or executive order, they can take away our rights to life, they can redefine marriage, and they can challenge our adherence to the truths best expressed in sacred scripture. Our rights don't come from any king or queen or black-robed judge. They come from God Almighty. We must protect and cherish this heavenly gift. That starts with each of you. That starts with our families, our churches, and our communities. If people of faith rise up and speak out, the light of truth will not be defeated. And come 2017, if I am elected president, on the very first day in office, I will direct the U.S. Department of Justice and the IRS and every other federal agency that the persecution of religious liberty ends today. I will sign any pro-life legislation that comes to my desk. And I will nominate judges to the court who will respect the Constitution and do not seek to impose their values from the bench. And as president, every day, I will work to promote a culture of life and faith. So thank you for your engagement in this critical election. Together, we can reignite the promise that has made this country the greatest beacon for faith and freedom that the world has ever known. Thank you. God bless you.
We will hear from some more of the candidates a little later in today's program. You know, the effort to quarantine our faith to our churches and our homes is not just about the cultural and political issues of today, like abortion or the redefinition of marriage. Ultimately, it is about the gospel, the ability to carry out the Great Commission. Without a vibrant First Amendment and a church that is willing to use it, America's future is bleak. No one is carrying that message with greater urgency than my good friend Dr. Ronnie Floyd, who is a pastor of Cross Church in Arkansas, and he is also the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Please welcome Dr. Ronnie Floyd. Dr. Floyd, welcome to Free to Believe.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, and it's a joy to be with you today. Think about it with me for a moment. The secularization of America has done so much to disrupt American Christianity. Initially, it tried to make us become extinct unsuccessfully. And then it attempted to neutralize us. And to some degree, a little successful. And now the attention has turned toward silencing the church. I want us to understand today that that's one thing that we cannot let happen.
Amen.
We must understand that in this day and time when leadership is limited, we do not want to live out what Judges says in 17 verse 6. That what? Whatever the people saw with their own eyes, they thought it was right, and they did. This is not about doing whatever we want. You see, we have to look at it as born-again believers as from a biblical perspective, but also with balance. And today, in my time, I just want to talk to you about the importance of the following subject. What is it? How important is it? Seek the Lord. Reach the lost. Engage the culture. The Bible tells us all of this in the 4th chapter of the book of Colossians. It says in verse number 2, devote yourselves to prayer. Stay alert in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open a door to us for the message to speak the mystery of the Messiah, for which I am in prison, so that I may reveal it as I am required to speak. Act wisely toward outsiders, making the most of the time, for your speech must always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. What's the solution? Seek the Lord. Think about these things with me for a moment. That word devote here is a word that means prevailing. It is a word that means persevering. In other words, we're called upon to prevail in prayer. Here is Paul writing from a prison cell in the midst of his own challenges, and he's telling us we need to devote ourselves to prayer. Whatever is happening today in the American culture, we must seek the Lord. And he said to do so with a watchful eye, not an eye that just ignores what's going on in the world, never thinks about what's going on in the world, never reads the web or the news accounts or whatever it is. Christians cannot be alienated like that and be effective. Right. We can't even pray and live out our faith because God is calling us to even pray and to seek Him with a watchful eye. You see, we do that with thanksgiving regardless of what our circumstances are. And that's where the power of it is. And that's why we've got to keep our eyes on Jesus Christ. I know today that There are churches meeting together, and without question, the number one need in the church is a mighty fresh move of God like the church has never seen before. I mean, we call that revival, and I just want to say that that is the greatest need. And what you will find is that great prayer always precedes great movements of God. I say it this way: there is no great movement of God that has ever occurred that is not first preceded without the extraordinary prayer of God's people. We need to seek the Lord. The Bible also tells us that we need to reach the lost. You see, churches just can't be living within themselves seeking the Lord, but we at the same time be reaching the lost. In fact, the apostle said that we need to pray for the open door. What is the open door for? The open door is so that you might be able to share the gospel. We know that according to the book of Acts, that this is exactly what happened in Paul's life. God used him while he was even in the prison to be able to be effective for the cause of Jesus Christ. You see, America, it's acting the way it's supposed to act because much of America does not know the living reality of knowing Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, of having life change, sin forgiven, and the hope of heaven when we die. The joy of knowing the Lord is with us all of the time. This is why we must be diligent to share the gospel, to preach the gospel, to advance the gospel. This is why churches must have a vision to penetrate the lostness in their own community. When you think about America, I mean, let me tell you something. America is filled with many people that don't know the Lord. And churches need to have a vision that will reach their town and their city with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Amen. Now think about the balance here. We need to be committed to devoting ourselves to the Lord, seeking the Lord, but we also need to be in this posture of reaching the lost. And while we're doing those things, we engage the culture. You see, when we're actively seeking the Lord and we're out here with the real people trying to give them the good news of the gospel, we then have the capacity to engage the culture. It's amazing that in this passage, the apostle who wanted the open door for the gospel, he told us to watch out for the way we say things. He told us that we need to have our speech, what? Seasoned. He tells us that we need to act wisely toward outsiders. We need to be gracious. We need to be kind. We need to be committed to that with people. I want to call upon us today. We need to work on that a lot in the church. I've tried my best over the course of years to grow in that, and I'm still growing in it. I want to be effective, and I can't be effective if my tone is not accurate. You see, in today's world, whether it's right or wrong, tone precedes truth. People will not hear the truth if our tone is not right. And I want to challenge you today to really be careful to do just what he said, and that is to watch the tone of the way we say things. Yes, people need to hear truth, but if they don't hear us, then it doesn't matter. We want to be effective. Therefore, we must engage the culture. And guess what? When you effectively engage the culture, the end result is you influence the culture. And if we really want to influence people and influence the direction of the American society, we need the hope of the gospel going out through our lives and our churches. We need to be diligently on our face before the Lord, seeking the Lord, so that we can effectively influence the direction of a nation that we love. So many times as I've traveled across the country, I'm asked this common question: Pastor Floyd, do you have any hope for America? they are somewhat surprised when I answer, because I give a resounding yes. Because I do have hope. You say, well, how do you have hope in the midst of this? Let me tell you why I have hope. Because I choose to believe God. What are you believing?
Amen.
I choose to believe God can do anything, anytime, anywhere with anyone. And I choose to believe that my God can do more in a moment than you can do in a lifetime. Seek the Lord. Reach the lost. Engage the culture.
As always, Dr. Floyd, great
Thank
job.
you, brother.
Let me ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
So, seeking the Lord, reaching the lost, engaging the culture. We almost live, I would say, in New Testament times. As a church out there gathered today, listening to that message, should they expect when they do that, that the red carpet is going to be rolled out for them in their community?
No, they won't get the red carpet, but what you will get is a little bit of resistance sometime in some places, and sometimes a lot. But it comes back to what I said a moment ago, Tony. We need to watch our tone. You know, if you will love people, they have a tendency to hear. And if we will talk to people, we won't talk about people as much. Right. And that's what the problem is in America. We need to start talking to each other.
And sometimes it takes persistence, because the first time you may have some obstacles, they may not hear, but we just need to be persistent in our communities and in our engagement in a loving, humble way, but nonetheless a bold and courageous way in which we do not apologize for the truth. But you were with us a year ago this past November in Houston, Texas, where pastors there, and this is, I think, somewhat symbolic of the hostility we see today, where the mayor subpoenaed the sermons of pastors there in Houston, Texas. Now that tells me a couple things. It tells me, the one, that politicians are just out of touch, because you don't have to subpoena a pastor to get his sermons.
I would gladly give any politician my sermons.
Well, the point is that we're going to face some resistance. We can't internalize it. We can't become angry or embittered.
That's right.
We have to continue to stand and speak the truth.
That's right. You know, the way I say it is this. We need to hold the truth of God in one hand and the love of God in the other. And when we do that, something connects. People have a tendency to hear what we say.
Well, Dr. Floyd, I appreciate you and your work in leading the Southern Baptist Convention, and going beyond that and reaching other spiritual leaders of our nation, calling them to seek the Lord, to reach the lost, and engage our culture. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, friend. Blessings.
We made reference to Houston, Texas, and 5 pastors there in Houston, Texas, called the Houston Five, had the mayor subpoena their sermons and other communications, but they stood and had a tremendous impact on their community. Watch this message from Houston, Texas.
From all over the country here showing support for local pastors in their fight, which they say is an attack on their First Amendment rights.
This is an opportunity for Christians across America to declare we intend to stand for Jesus Christ and to defend religious freedom here in America.
Fundamentally, this began when Annise Parker, the mayor of Houston, proposed what they were calling at that point an equal rights ordinance.
But a big portion of it was the transgender or gender identity portion. Men could go into women's restrooms and women could go into men's restrooms based on how they felt about themselves.
The imagery that I have in my mind is a grown man going into the restroom and a 6-year-old girl standing on side of her using the restroom.
It's a threat to public safety. It is an infraction on religious liberty.
It literally motivated and united all of us together.
When we stand together, it's much stronger than we by ourselves.
Opponents of the ordinance now have 30 days to collect the more than 17,000 petition signatures needed to appeal the decision.
We got the minimum number of signatures required and we submitted it to the City of Houston, and the mayor would not validate it.
A petition to repeal the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance was ruled invalid Monday by Houston City Attorney David Feldman.
The City of Houston has issued subpoenas demanding that a group of pastors turn over their sermons as part of a battle to enforce an equal rights ordinance in the city.
This is about political intimidation. That's what is so chilling about this. This is unprecedented, and we've been hearing from pastors across the nation.
After a great deal of soul searching, I came to the conclusion that I would direct the city attorney to withdraw the subpoenas.
I stand here today that I may speak, preach, and teach on the issues that the Bible speaks about, and be not afraid to be subpoenaed. Let the people vote.
The Texas Supreme Court overruled the city and ordered the measure to go on the ballot so the people could vote.
It's one of those moments in time that you stand up and say enough is enough is enough.
Houston's Equal Rights Ordinance is soundly rejected. The margin, 61 to 39%.
The stakes couldn't even be higher than they are. We find ourselves on the side of persecution. If it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. It's time to put it to an end.
If you have an issue in your city, in your state, stand up. Keep your people to stand. Make your voice heard. And whenever the time comes that you feel threatened, I'll say to every pastor, stand your ground.
If this starts in Houston, it could spread to other places.
Members of the Business Coalition are supporting legislation that would guarantee equal rights in the workplace for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people.
Students as young as kindergartners will be able to choose whether they would like to use the boys' or girls' restrooms.
And this law would make it illegal for that private Christian business owner or that private Christian school from living out their values.
That's what this is about, is making sure that as an individual, when you enter the marketplace, you don't have to leave your religious freedom behind.
No matter what part of the country, there is nobody off the table right now that is not being assaulted by this agenda. And we have to come together. You have to organize at the local level, take your city seriously, and God has put you there for a reason. Step up.
I want to tell every pastor, for a time such as this, they must speak out. They must rise up and they must stand strong.
And if this happens in other place, everybody, Spanish, African American, every nationality has to be together in unity.
If every pastor in this country would stand up, and then every Christian in this country would stand up, things would change very quickly.
The Houston Five, the pastors in Texas that stood up against the mayor, I believe, is a turning point for the church in America. They rallied the members of their congregations and members of the community, and they have stood up against this city council and against this mayor. And since then, literally dozens of cities across the nation have followed their example and have stood up for religious freedom, the freedom to believe and live one's life according to those beliefs. So I'm encouraged by what I see happening in Houston, Texas, and as a result in cities across America. What an amazing story. A great victory in the nation's fourth largest city, and it happened because pastors and churches took a stand. Joining me now is one of the key pastors who took a stand in Houston, Texas, Dr. Steve Riggles. Steve, welcome to Free to Believe.
Nice to be with you.
This story still amazes me, and I mean, I have been immersed in it, but I have to ask you this question. What was it like when you first got word that your sermons were being subpoenaed?
Well, I think the first thought I had is, I don't know that I knew the mayor would go that far, but I just thought this is a little crazy.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least.
But
you have a church. Let me set the stage a little. Let me step back for just a moment. You have a very large church in Houston, Texas. You've been very involved in the community in terms of serving the community. I mean, you are a part of the community. So this was not like it was you're some outside group there that this action was taken against. You are a part of the community.
32 years in the city.
I mean, and I've been there. Their church. They're engaged in serving the community, and this is not something that you would normally think.
I actually have an award from that mayor.
Did you have to subpoena her to get it?
Something changed, I guess, in terms of how she felt about it.
Well, I think, a lot has changed, but it's shown how the cultural landscape in our country has shifted. But I want to ask you a question about when this began to unfold as a pastor of a megachurch, how you led your congregation into this engagement.
Well, when this all actually began with a drainage fee in the city, it was very deceptive, and pastors began to rally around that. We felt like the ballot language ought to be fair. So when we got to this one, we already had a core of pastors that had joined together of all races. So when this thing came up, obviously, we weren't starting from scratch, which I think is really important in cities, so that pastors and community leaders are prepared for these things before they ever get there. And then you're scrambling after the fact. So when it first happened, I mean, my first response was, the mayor can have every sermon I have, but she's not getting it with a piece of paper from the court. Now, there's no way I'll give that, and the other four were all friends of mine out of these times, and all of them felt exactly the same way. So collectively, we just said no. And, to the congregation, it pretty much enraged the congregation and the community.
And the nation.
And the nation.
Because I know within just about a 2-week period, we were able to pull together one of the largest events we've ever done in the history of the organization. Over 500,000 people joining on a Sunday night at I Stand Sunday. And as I've told you before, organizations like ours that defend religious freedom, that come alongside the churches in their mission to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, we couldn't do it unless there were pastors like you standing up.
Well, one of the very significant things that brought pressure was Family Research Council, your leadership in spreading the word and causing the outrage in the nation. If no one ever heard of us, it wouldn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But when the word spreads, and boy, this ought to be a lesson to all of us who really feel strongly about these values that I don't care if who we are, our voice matters.
And the unity.
The
that
unity.
We stand together. I want to bring in Dr. Rick Scarborough, someone you know, who you actually serve on his board of Vision America. Rick is up in our studio, and I think I want to bring Rick into this discussion regarding the impact that your church has had on the community. Rick, I know you know Dr. Riggle very well, and I want you to kind of walk us a little further into this story.
Well, I will. Steve is a very close personal friend. We've fought a lot of battles together. The church I pastored for 12 years was about 10 miles from Steve's church there in Clear Lake. But what I'd like to do is ask Steve to talk about two things that I have watched over the years that are dear to him, that set the table for the impact his church is having culturally. And that has to do with prayer and presence. Steve, talk to the listeners. A lot of folks don't have the resources a church your size has, but you made the impact not because of the numbers of people, but because you laid a foundation in prayer and because you demonstrated personally the importance of presence. Talk with us about that, please.
Yeah, well, I think I'd say this. One is we weren't always big. When Becky and I started the church, and we had 12. So I know the journey all the way up, and our core convictions have never changed in the 32 years. So any size church can do what we've done.
Yeah.
And in terms of prayer, we have a deep commitment to prayer because we believe the issues that we face in this nation will not be solved on a political basis, though we ought to be as engaged as we can. If what we need is a spiritual awakening, we all get that. So our call in seeing that happen is to pray. So we do that. All of our campuses, we have a real prayer meeting. When I'm in town, I lead one of them, and we really pray. Sometimes we have a message. This week, the one I led, the whole hour and a half, 90 minutes, was spent in the congregation in engaged prayer. So I would encourage every pastor in the country. We always say we believe in prayer, but let's get a praying army going all across this nation, really crying out to God. Remember, in Sodom, the Bible says the cry of wickedness reached the heavens. That's why heaven came down to see if it was altogether true. So, and the cry of 10 righteous would have been louder than the cry of the whole city of Sodom, of wickedness. So let's make sure the cry of righteousness. And then in regard to presence, I think I don't think we have a problem with people in the nation in terms of what they believe, their values. What we have a problem with is them standing up and speaking up collectively, together. So what happens then is we're divided, and we have all these people who seem to speak for the majority. And so, one of the things that early on in issues, when there are issues like this that I say, is they're not speaking for me. I'm going to speak for myself. And I want our congregation to speak up, and I've taught our congregation that. And so what you saw in Houston is you saw a city speak up. That can happen anywhere in this nation.
But it takes leadership.
It takes some leadership.
It does. Rick, I know you've been through this in your years of ministry, but I want to ask you about the pastors and churches out there that maybe are on the fence about, I don't know that I want to get too involved in this. I'm just not sure. What would you say to those churches about the times in which we live and the fact that we see that things are not really the way we're told they are, and what people see and what the media tells them is actually not the truth?
Yeah, I would just say that, in this day that we live for pastors, this is one of the greatest days to ever be engaged in regard to a pastor standing up and leading with a prophetic voice in the nation. You can go way back in our history to come to a time like this, a crucial time, the defining of the nation. So I'd encourage pastors all over the nation to, if you have influence over 50, that's 50 people you're influencing, or 100 or 200. So what if you combine, there's about 300 and some thousand places of worship of all kinds. So even if 100,000 of them, if 100,000 pastors, particularly those of you that are young and younger, and I'd encourage you, don't sell out to this hour that you just go along, or somehow you have to water down this message. What we're standing for
Amen.
are moral values. These are not politics. These are godly values,
Transcendent
biblical
truths.
values, and they transcend generations. And so if pastors will stand up, their voice matters in that congregation.
Absolutely. Rick, I'll give you the final question.
I would say to all the pastors listening, what a great day we live in. No one goes into the ministry for the money. They go in because there's a burning desire to make a difference. A lot of pastors lose their way in the course of trying to raise their families and build their churches. But preachers, God has given us a brand new opportunity to matter. This is the day when preachers can stand up and speak out. And I believe when we do, God invades with his power and presence. What a great day to make a difference.
Absolutely. But I want to go back to one final point, and it's leadership. And you exhibited that leadership in Houston, along with the other pastors that you'd built relationships with. As you said before, these relationships were pre-existing. And this is what we call our watchman pastors do, is to pray, as you have been doing for years, to preach, which you've been doing, and partner with other pastors, which you've been doing. And when that time of testing comes, you stand together, and the people will follow.
They will. They absolutely will. They will stand there. You don't have to be ugly about this. What you do have to be is very determined. And if the pastors will be that, it'll be amazing. An army will start following.
If it can happen in Houston, Texas, the nation's 4th largest city, I believe it can happen anywhere.
I believe that.
Pastor Steve, thanks so much for being here today. God bless you. Well, we've heard about getting involved and engaged at the community level there in a city, nation's 4th largest city. But let's expand it a little bit to the issue of impacting your entire state. And helping me to talk about this is Dr. Mark Harris. He is the pastor of First Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and JC Church. He is the pastor of Victory in Truth Ministries outside of Columbus, Ohio. Pastors, welcome. Come on in. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you.
JC. Mark, I want to start with you because you led an effort there in Charlotte very similar to the legislation we saw there in Houston, Texas, an ordinance that would have given special rights to people based upon their sexual behavior and orientation. And you did this as you began to build up these culture impact teams. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was fascinating because it did come. The timing fell in conjunction with when we were just beginning to get culture impact teams started across not only Charlotte but across the state. When I got a call one day from a church member who actually made me aware that this was about to happen before our city council. And so we were able to get some calls together, pull pastors together. It was a great launch, to be honest with you, about culture impact teams and what could happen. And the folks began to come together. Rallies were planned. We got websites up and where folks could sign petitions. And I'm telling you, we put forth a lot of effort. But yet, at the end of the day, God reserved the glory and honor all for himself, as he should, and did. And what was really amazing about that is when the vote was taken, it came back. What every political analyst would have said would have been a 7-4 vote in favor of that ordinance. It actually failed 6-5 that very evening. And it was just the hand of God that worked in a miraculous way. And it just taught me again and again that just what you've been talking about this morning, when we pray together, when we work together, we see God do awesome things.
And it's amazing when we have that presence where we're engaged. But JC, before I come to you about what's happening in Ohio, the Buckeye State, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of the culture impact teams, because oftentimes as Christians we get alarmed when the bell rings and we run to the engagement, but then as soon as we prevail, like you did in North Carolina, we go back home. Mm-hmm. But the culture impact team becomes part of the DNA of the church, and it is an ever-present moral conscience, not only for the church but for the community, so that these things are going to come back.
Correct.
And you'll be equipped the next time.
Well, and I think that's what it taught us. I think it was a great launching pad for a lot of the culture impact team hopes that we had to begin to take shape, because we saw how much better organized we could have been, should have been, and would have been had we had culture impact teams in as many churches as we do now. And hopefully, and it is coming back, we've already been told by our newly elected mayor just late last year that she intended to bring it back. And just this week, I received a phone call that it'll be middle of February that our city council will be voting on this issue again. So we feel like we're in a much better position this time as far as our culture impact teams. But again, it's going to come down to God moving in a powerful way.
We have to just resolve the fact that we've got to continue to stand no matter what. Pastor JC, you are in the state of Ohio. You, like Dr. Harris, are our state leader for our Watchman outreach to pastors. You have been going into all 88 counties of Ohio with a special strategy to organize pastors in those counties to have this type of presence.
Yeah, when we look at Ohio, when we begin looking at the information, there's 17,000 churches in Ohio, and we have 88 counties. And our governor of the last debate said no Republican has won the White House who hasn't won Ohio since 1860. So in Ohio, we feel the real pressure of the whole big picture. So my heart was, Lord, please tell me there's at least one Bonhoeffer in 88 counties. That was the starting point. And so we started flushing through all the data and visiting those counties and slowly building a network of one key strategic pastor in each of those counties so that we have an infrastructure, not just responding to the issues and scrambling, but to build an infrastructure for the future.
And how are pastors in churches responding?
The pastors, truthfully, Tony, a lot of them I feel are ill-equipped, and there's a fear there that if we meet with them face-to-face and take the time, answer their questions and concerns, get them to understand the big picture, they're speaking up on the issues, especially after the Supreme Court decision in June. We've received more inquiries than ever in the last 4 or 5 years of pastors saying, I've had enough. What do I do? It's really a matter of getting them engaged, equipping them, and empowering them so that we can respond.
What's the appetite you're seeing for the culture impact teams, for the churches that are they hungry for this type of tool, resource?
We are seeing it, and I think to JC's point, perhaps the decision in June became somewhat of lighting of the fire. We know that we've been going across North Carolina in 10 different locations across the state. Our goal is initially to try to identify at least 10 churches in every county. There's 100 counties in North Carolina, and if we could find just 10 that would be willing to have a pastor that would step up and lead his church, that would give us 1,000 culture impact teams. And I'm going to tell you, 1,000 culture impact teams in a state like North Carolina could radically affect the entire local, state, and national politics.
Yeah, we're going to see some stories here in a bit about how culture impact teams have literally transformed communities. But there's something different about this wave of engagement that we're seeing in this day as opposed to maybe something we've seen in our past. There is a clear understanding that this is not, you heard it from Dr. Floyd earlier, this is not just political. It's not just cultural. We understand. And I know that our those that came before us understood this too, but we're leading with this. We understand that this is spiritual in nature, that America doesn't have a political problem, it has a spiritual problem. In Ohio, you have a program going on that addresses that very issue, the Ohio 714. Tell our viewers about that.
Well, what happened on that issue, Tony, we received a phone call from CBS about a month before the Supreme Court decision saying how critical Ohio is and are the pastors going to do anything. So that's when we came up with the concept of Ohio 714. And what we did is a prayer gathering on the steps at the state capitol, and we invited every evangelical leader. Ronnie Floyd came in. We had almost every major denomination you could imagine involved in a 90-minute prayer segment. There was no preaching, no singing, and if we can see prayer as a form of worship, if we can't worship together, we won't walk together. If we don't worship together, we will not war together. So we sounded the alarm, and that's what I think's happened and is happening across America. Is the alarm has gone off. There's an awakening taking place. What we are trying to do with the Ohio 714 is alignment for assignment so there can be action throughout the state. So what we did is had 5-minute prayer segments for 90 minutes with 18 state evangelical leaders at the state capitol, and this year we're doing it again in June, and we're doing 6 of those in the 6 major cities using the regional key influential evangelical leaders throughout the state to come together in a prayer initiative that we call Ohio 714.
Wow, that's exciting. It really is. Before we go to our next 15-minute working group session, we've got some questions that have come in. I want to get you guys to help me answer this question. This one probably gets the award from coming from the furthest distance. This actually comes to us from South Africa. And Errol asked this question, do Americans understand, and I want to ask this of you because of your comments about pastors and a little bit of their hesitancy. Mm-hmm. He says, do Americans understand that if they lose the battle for religious freedom, the impact on the world will be devastating? If the U.S. falls, we all fall. Do pastors get the gravity of the times in which we live?
Well, I think they're beginning to get the gravity because I think it's unfortunate, but I think people begin to realize when it affects them right where they live, they begin to awaken. I fear a lot of pastors have not had that world vision that you're talking about, and as the question asked, that as America goes, that affects the world. But I think pastors are beginning to at least broach the point where they're saying, hey, this is about to affect my freedom, the effect of my church, and our people, as you've been talking about all morning, being in a position of having to check your faith. We've been preaching a gospel that says when Christ comes into your life, He changes you forever, and He fills you day by day through the power of the Spirit. And we're now about to have to say to our people, you have to check your faith at the door on your way out on Sunday morning. That's just not going to cut it.
And it impacts the world, the entire
world.
Folks, we'll still take your questions. You can send them questions at frc.org or tweet them at FRCDC. We have a question here in our live audience. Damon has a question. Damon, what's your question?
Hi, Tony. First of all, just thank you very much for this event, which is invaluable to us as a local pastor, and then all of the work that FRC does is critical to enabling us as pastors to do what God's called us to do. So just thank you again for that. My question is, as a church pastor, excuse me, change the mic.
There we go. A little technical difficulty there.
As the pastor of a church in suburban Texas for about 15 years, an existing church now felt the call to move to D.C. For two and a half years ago, we moved to Washington to plant a church right here on Capitol Hill. So we went from an existing facility to what modern church planters today are doing.
You went from Texas to Washington, D.C.
Washington.
You know that had to have been God.
Yes, absolutely. And so we need you. My question is this. As we, along with all of our peers here in the D.C. area proper, most church pastors and planters function in rented facilities, public facilities and private facilities, but they're not owned facilities, at least the evangelical churches. What are some precautions, some things that we can look out for and plan for to make sure that as we preach the truth of Scripture, that we have everything in order so that we don't have to question, what's going to happen with our place of worship and where we're going to have church?
It's a really good question. As we saw with a lot of our churches in New York recently, that had to go all the way to through the court system to secure their right to rent facilities there in New York from the schools. Obviously, there are some steps you can take in protecting your church through the bylaws that you need to make some changes and tweaks to in the days in which we live, and that information can be found on our website. You can go to cultureimpact.org or to our Watchman pastors.org, and we've got those resources available. But I know that a lot of small churches, startup churches, do that, and we've even found some that because they're a church, maybe they won't rent to them. What would you recommend to these pastors that find that type of opposition?
First, I would say certainly your bylaws. Secondly, I would be familiar with Alliance Defending Freedom and who the state lead attorneys are in case you were to need some assistance in understanding any of the legalities and making sure that your leases and arrangements are proper, and that would really help a lot. That's what they're there for, a real good source.
Yeah, we've got a number of the legal organizations, so Liberty Counsel, Liberty Institute, Alliance Defending Freedom, Freedom Guard, and do not hesitate to call on them and just email us, let us know, we'll put you in touch with them. They are eager to defend your freedom to believe, so don't hesitate. Let them decide if it's a good case. You contact us, we'll put you in touch. This comes from Patrina via Twitter. How do you get believers to care about preserving their religious freedom before persecution hits them personally?
Well, I think, that's a great question, and I think that's what we're all wrestling with. And I think it's really to follow a scriptural mandate. It kind of goes back to what I said earlier, and that is that our gospel says that when you come to Christ and you surrender your life to Him, that you live out that faith day by day. And the whole idea of free to believe is based around the fact that we as Americans are free to work and to live in a way that's consistent with our faith. And if we don't have that, then we are surrendering the freedom that Christ desires for us to have. And I think that we've got to continue to challenge our folks. I told a group of pastors the other day, if you're going to put up signs on your parking lot that when people leave, it says you're now entering the mission field, then you have no choice but to get involved and stand up as a leader in this day and time, because to do anything less is utter hypocrisy.
Here's a question that comes in from Michael. I think it's a really good question. It says, if we support the freedom to believe of a baker not to be required to bake a cake for a gay couple, what do we say about a large catering hall or banquet facility that chooses not to host gay couples, or a large car dealership who chooses not to sell cars to gay couples? When does religious freedom become discrimination? And I think this is a part of the confusion that the media has created. What we have seen in these cases is simply people wanting to be accommodated because of their beliefs when it comes to issues such as marriage. In fact, it's been all surrounding the issue of marriage, because that is something that God speaks to with great clarity. And so what we have seen is we've not and would not support Christians who would not want to do business with or interact with anybody. In fact, as Christians, we're called to serve all. But to be compelled to engage in something that clearly is counter to the Word of God is a loss of freedom.
Absolutely. And when we in Charlotte, this conversation last time around, I was sitting on a radio program with a gentleman that was representing Equality NC on the other side of the issue. And off air, when we were just talking, I said, listen, really and truly, if there is a restaurant or somewhere that would not serve you because you're homosexual, I would encourage you to please call me and let me know, because I would go stand beside you and defend your freedom to be able to eat at that restaurant. And I think they've taken the issue and tried to twist it and turn it and caused us to really find ourselves being challenged. But yet the reality is, as you point out, the issue is about marriage, and that's the key issue here.
And one other aspect of that is that as Christians, we have every right to engage in the debate over public policy, bringing our faith to the table. Correct. I mean, we all have a worldview. We all have an orientation. We all have a set of values that comes from somewhere.
Right.
And ours are not invalidated simply because they come from the Bible. In fact, the founders understood that that was the hope of America, that we had a vibrant First Amendment that allowed for that engagement and discussion.
Exactly.
Gentlemen, great discussion. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for the great work you're doing in Ohio JC. Mark, tremendous job in North Carolina. Thanks for being here today and being a part of Free to Believe.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right, time now for another opportunity for you to make this real. We're going to break into your working groups. The questions will appear on your screen. If you don't have a local working group, in about 30 seconds, you can join our working group. We'll be back in 15 minutes.
You guys want to from the different presenters that were speaking. One impacted me. Tone precedes truth, and it speaks to the heart of how we need to talk with the folks that have questions for us. How do we need to lead discussions that we make sure we are building relationship with the truth that we speak. Debbie, you were mentioning something that you heard.
I heard Dr. Floyd talk about loving people, talking with them and not about them. And coming from a heart of love, even though they may make us out to be haters, we still know, and many others know, that we are coming at this community that we serve from a heart of love.
Right.
Well, those we interact with that come every Sunday to church,
Right.
they are in the workforce and they're hearing this discussion out there. So it's imperative that we talk in this manner so they in turn know how to speak with their fellow employees out there. Anyone else?
I heard them say Judges 17:6, what they saw they thought was right. And, you know, what we're being shown on television and in the movie theaters and in the schools, etc., isn't right. It's not truth. And I think that if we speak truth and we change the dialogue from haters to we love you enough to share the truth, that will be, I think that will be something to stand on and harder to take down.
And I think tone is so important, Randy. That hit me too, was that verse, you know, speaking the truth in love. And I know when I look at some of the stories that have been shared, I'm like, I don't want that to happen to me. And my tone easily can be one of fear. And I'm going out there trying to make sure everybody sees it from my perspective. But I just really appreciate that verse. It tells us it's got to be in love, it's got to be truth, and then it's got to be spoken. We do need to verbalize it, but in the right way.
I know our passion can take over at times because these are critical issues. These are having impact on all of us as we look and watch what's happening around us in community, in the state, and across the nation. So we got to really check ourselves as we have these conversations and make sure we have a smile on our face at least when we're talking about these important issues.
Right, right.
You know, one of the things you were talking about earlier, Darcy, is we were having a discussion. You mentioned prayer and the absolute need for that kind of precedes everything that we do.
Right. It's the basis for everything. Without it, we are, you know, defenseless. I mean, God needs to lead us. We need to pray with the Holy Spirit or through the Holy Spirit to kind of set the foundation and the groundwork to move forward. We need His direction.
So one of the things we can do is set times of the month that we can come together and pray for specific reasons. Now, a resource that is available out there from watchmanpastors.org, if you scroll down on that webpage, you'll see the different tools that are available to churches and pastors. And one of that is to click on the prayer team targets that our guy Pierre Bynum produces on a weekly basis. And so that gives us an opportunity as he sends that across the country to pray in one accord, if you will, with many others across this land. But that's a tool that we can work from. Maybe many say, well, you know, I don't know what to pray about, I don't know how to be specific in this. Well, this is a tool that will help us lead others through specific things happening right now in our communities or across the country that we can pray with. Agreement there?
Yes, yes.
Absolutely.
And I think what you mentioned, Randy, about the pastor leading that charge, I know that my home church, the pastor has called for a day of fasting and prayer on the second Tuesday of every month.
There you go.
Leading up to this upcoming election. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but the unity that's produced with the whole church praying at once for the same thing is wonderful.
That's good.
And I appreciate that intersection that was discussed earlier with both prayer and with action as we talk about these culture impact teams, because action is important and prayer is important, and sometimes we get one and sometimes we only do the other one. And I remember somebody saying one time, you know, if you have somebody with a medical condition, you pray and you call the doctor. You don't just pray and you don't just call the doctor, because both are important.
That's right. Very good.
Sure. Now, Debbie or Darcy, one of you were talking about the need to see other churches start, grow, and develop a culture impact team there as well.
Right.
I think that's absolutely critical. How can we get that done?
At my home church, our pastor created a pastor's lunch. It happens once a month. They talk about community issues, concerns. They pray. They share prayer requests specifically for their church or for themselves. And I think through that created a place they could go to for help with particular needs. You have a relationship already started and created before trouble hits.
Right. In our church, one of the places where that happened, where churches began to talk to one another, was on the pro-life issue. When there was a challenge at the local abortion facility, different churches were already involved in mobilizing their people to, they were already talking about the issue, they were already making the needs, folks aware of the need to go and witness in front of the facility and participate in things like 40 Days for Life. And so when a legal issue arose with one of the pro-life leaders in the area, he was in one church, but he had a whole network of churches that were already talking to each other and working together, able to pray for him and uphold one another.
I think that's key, Kana, that the pastors are together, and like Darcy said as well, we're talking about biblical values. It's not politics.
Right.
No.
It's biblical values
right.
that we need to stand up for and stand together on as we deal with these issues.
Right.
That's right.
So one of the things we can do as a culture impact team is we can produce a report on cultural issues, things in news, etc., that are eventually, if not impacting us now, will. We can produce a report and get that to the pastor on a regular basis.
Right.
So that as he meets with other pastors, he can have these conversations where he's aware of, and then bring the attention to other pastors. And, as we move about the community, we want to ask for other church leaders that we then can build a relationship with, bring this idea to them, and start populating our communities with culture impact teams and help other churches raise and grow and sustain those efforts as well.
I think it would be a good idea, because I was just thinking about this. Some churches call them vestry or elders or the leadership council, but in our church it starts with the pastor, as it does at other churches, and then we've got to work with the vestry, make sure they understand, and then we work with the congregation, and then we send our pastor out to talk to other pastors, and then when they have permission, our vestry can go and talk to the other vestry, and kind of train the trainer, but share our successes and how we've done it, what we've learned from our mistakes or little challenges, so that they feel empowered to move forth. They know what to do.
I think in Houston, as Pastor Steve Riggle spoke about, the unity that they had there among the churches, they were all attacked.
Right.
Right.
And they did come together and stand up for biblical values and stood strong.
Right.
But together, that networking and reaching out to each other ahead of time, I think, is very important.
Right. You could really see the rich relationships that had developed over the years, even prior to any of this happening.
Right.
That's a good point.
One of the things I saw about Houston and have heard about as I've read regarding that story is it cost the churches about $1 million to litigate through that process.
Wow.
It cost the church. I know Steve Riggle's church gave a ton of money. Other churches gave a great amount of resource to that fight. But this speaks to the point that if we can be proactive by being proactive, involved in our communities, involved in the city government, and watching and observing and speaking to, we can spend less money before a situation like this happens, or keep it from happening, as Mark Harris was talking about earlier. It'll cost us much less. And we are driven by money, are we not? So that would be an
If
incentive.
the community can see what we do with our money that is good, how we help different populations with their specific needs, they won't want us to spend $1 million fighting in court on some ridiculous issue. I mean, we'll have their respect and trust already.
True. And another thing is if we encourage our own people within the church, Christians, who hold to biblical values, to run for public office. I'll never forget one day our pastor encouraged people to run from everything to dog catcher on up. And so if we do have people elected to the local school boards, the local city council, then maybe those decisions won't go against biblical values, but rather will be in support of biblical values.
And I totally agree with that. A lot of times it's easy to think the only solutions can come from Washington, you know, at the federal level, but there's so many things we see, and I think increasingly more so, happening at the local level with the, you know, from Houston to school boards, and that happen here in Virginia. We see it all over the place, and I think the more you're involved, even at the local level, you understand the needs of your community. You can serve your community because you can look them in the eye and you understand what everybody's going through.
Yep.
And we have to pay attention. The people, you know, in our county, in Virginia, didn't realize what the school board was trying to do. And when someone was alerted, they alerted others. And then this coalition was created, and they could stand up. Now, they were totally ignored by the school board, which supports the need for us to be active in local elections and get really involved, because, you know, these are major issues with kids' lives and their educations, and that's where it starts.
There was a similar issue that's been brewing in Florida. I have a friend in a city in Florida that's considering an ordinance similar to what was spoken about in North Carolina and in Houston. And she is not in a position to run for public office, but she attended the meetings. She went to the public meetings, she listened, she asked for help in gathering resources, made a brief statement, spoke to some of the others who spoke there. They're now forming a local task force to address some of the issues and some of the misinformation that's been spread about that particular situation, so that they will be ready for the next meeting together. So it can be daunting, I think, if any of you have spoken at a city council meeting. It can be daunting, but it's important to be present, it's important to listen, and it's important to speak up, because that's where we can begin to connect with others. So I think our Culture Impact team can be a resource to people like that who know the truth and want to say something, but don't know what the next step would be and may be a little intimidated.
Yeah. Kenny, you know, over 200 communities across the country, their city councils have adopted this type of an ordinance that Houston spent $1 million fighting to overturn. So you're right. That's absolutely one of the things we can do as a Culture Impact team. And the importance of helping other churches start these teams is to alert those around to what Pastor Mark was talking about happened in Charlotte. They alerted the city, and they overwhelmed the city council and stood in line. They knew the process, which this is what the Culture Impact team helps bring understanding to. They arrived early, they got on the docket, and so we were able to speak the truth about what that ordinance would bring negatively to the city of Charlotte, and persuade and influence the city council to push that off, vote it down, maybe take a look at it a bit more. So these are all the great things that we can do. Now, so where do we get the resource? We're pulling from this Culture Impact Team manual that we have access to, that we can get out to other churches. And in the Culture Impact Team manual, it walks through everything that the church would need to launch what we are doing here today. And it calls them to inform, alert, engage, and then activate, and when we need to activate and go after issues like this. So all these things are available to us at cultureimpact.org. The resources for our pastor at watchmanpastors.org. So this is information we need to get out there.
All right, welcome back to Free to Believe. We gave you a few extra minutes to discuss there in your working groups. Hopefully you're beginning to see what we're doing here, and that is to help you come up with some very concrete steps and preparation for your church, your Culture Impact team, to defend the freedom to believe right there in your own community. All right, earlier we heard from some of the presidential candidates on their thoughts about the threats to religious freedom and what they would do as president to protect them. Here are a few more.
It's important for everyone in America to have a voice in the political process.
The government is representation of the people, and it's important that we put our vote in.
And it's our privilege as American citizens to vote and respect the honor of our fallen heroes who have defended our right to vote.
I would tell my friends that it's important to vote so that we can be a part of a possible change.
And I think that it's important that we become educated on all of the issues and vote for the best person that we think will do the job.
Hello, I'm Carly Fiorina. Religious liberty is under assault in our country. It is one of the ways that government now abuses its power instead of serving the people. It is why I'm running for president, because I think it's time to take our country back. I rolled out a blueprint to help take our country back, and among the most important components of that blueprint is a plan to restore the character of our nation by standing for life and protecting religious liberty. To take our country back, to fight for the character of our nation, will require a tested leader. I have been tested. I have beaten breast cancer. I have buried a child. I started as a secretary and fought my way to the top of corporate America. I fought my way into this election. My faith has been tested in good times and bad, and never found wanting. Citizens, it is time that we stand together and restore the character of our nation. It is time that we stand for religious liberty and life. It is time that we take our country back. With your help, your votes, and your support, I will bring tested and true leadership to the challenge of our times.
The greatest threat to religious freedom is people's ignorance of what it means. It means that of all the constitutional protections and provisions that we have, the foundation of all of them comes down to religious freedom. It's why it was the very first thing mentioned in the Bill of Rights. That's because if somebody in the government can tell us the limitations of what we can believe, then it's very easy for them to tell us the limitations of what we can say, who we can affiliate with, what we can publish, where we can go, how we can protect ourselves, our families, our homes, our private property, and what the government can do to us. I mean, after all, once they tell us they can restrict our beliefs, they can restrict anything. I think as president, we follow the Constitution, which means we ignore rulings that the Supreme Court or anyone else issues that do not have a basis in constitutional law. For example, there's no constitutional basis for the Supreme Court to have acted in the same-sex marriage decision. It simply isn't there. And the president should do what Jefferson did, Jackson, Adams, Madison, Lincoln, and that's ignore rulings that are unconstitutional and tell the Supreme Court that they simply won't carry them out. As it relates to the issue of protecting human life, the president should recognize that those constitutional provisions are already there in the 5th and 14th Amendment. And it's not enough to say we're going to pass a law, we're going to find a constitutional amendment, we're going to overturn Roe Wade. Why don't we do what is already there for us? As president, what I would do is simply recognize the personhood of every individual from conception forward and give them the protection that they are constitutionally due under the 5th and 14th Amendment. That's one way we protect religious liberty.
As I've been watching these videos from these presidential candidates, I was just thinking how encouraging it is that we have so many candidates running for the President of the United States who are unashamed to say they want to defend religious freedom in this country. We've made a lot of progress, but we have a lot more to go. In the 2012 election cycle, there were 90 million evangelical Christians in this country, social conservatives, those that share our values. Of those, 13 million were not registered to vote. And of those who were registered, 26 million did not vote. That has to improve. And today we're talking about tools to help churches improve their ability to impact their cultures. And Dr. Rick Scarborough is up in the studio, and he has an amazing new tool that will help churches be more effective in getting their folks registered and out to vote. Rick, tell us about this exciting program, Pastors 2028.
Thank you, Tony. You took the words right out of my mouth regarding these candidates. It's refreshing to know that we have choices. But beloved, if we don't show up and vote our values, if we're not there, then we have no one to blame but ourselves. Seated to my left is a wonderful man of God that I had the joy of meeting quite incidentally back in about September, as I recall, but somewhere in the course of the year 2002. We were traversing the state of Texas with Rick Perry, who was running for his first term as governor in his own right. He had already been in the governorship for a couple of years when he took that role as our lieutenant governor when President Bush was elected. But he was running for his first term, and we were doing rallies across the state to introduce pastors with a man who had a clear testimony of his love for Christ. We were using that tool to find access to pastors and to encourage them to lead their people to vote their values. We came to East Texas and bumped in, quite incidentally, to an attorney by the name of John Graves who just loved Jesus. He had secured the Republican nomination in a bid to become a congressman. In the course of putting together his campaign, he focused on mobilizing Christians. And so I say all of that to say, and John's going to say much more about it, what we're now doing in an organized fashion, we've created a tool that effectively does what John Graves was doing as a candidate for office. And so without more introduction than that, let me introduce to you my good friend, John Graves. John, I want you to describe, first of all, what does why the term Acts 2028, and then a little bit about it before we see a video.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sometimes in our lives when we're moving where we believe God wants us to go, it doesn't turn out the way we want it to, and we see later on what God was doing. And that's certainly true with what we're talking about here today. It's born out of a heart to serve pastors and to help them mobilize believers to be salt and light in our nation. And so I was running for Congress, as you mentioned, and what happened was I'd served several pastors and was close friends with several pastors of different denominations, and they had formed a prayer committee. And after that election was over, they were sitting around asking me, we worked so hard to mobilize our people, what do you think happened? And I just quoted the facts that Tony just mentioned, that half of Christians sometimes aren't registered to vote, and the ones that do, half of them don't vote, and they just didn't believe that. And one of them asked me, so that's just kind of the inception of this idea. They said, well, you have all that information? I said, yeah, it's public. You can go to the counties. It's cumbersome. It's a lot of work. Correct. But we had done the work. And so these churches asked me to run their membership list. And when we did it, they were stunned. And I was stunned that how few people were registered and voting. But what I learned from watching those pastors is they went into motion, because they each had a different denomination, a different leadership style. They did it different ways, but every one of them now had good information.
Information motivated them.
That's right. And so that's where the name came from, to answer your second question.
Well, give them the verse, though, Acts 20:28.
Acts 20:28, it says to pastors, be careful, be diligent to watch out for yourself and for your members, your congregation, your flock, that the Holy Spirit made you the overseer of. God cared enough about this to give the blood of His Son Jesus for this. And so that verse to me captures that this is an issue of a shepherd having good information to be diligent to know the state of his flocks so that he can steward them well or shepherd them well. And so that's where we came to the name. And we don't call it 2028 Initiative because it's not about what a pastor does. A lot of pastors, most of my closest friends are pastors, and it's not about what they do, it's about who they are. And when they understand there's not this political thing to stay out of, we're called to be salt and light. We're called to just be Christians in the government and the culture we find ourselves in. We get to elect who governs us.
Right.
And we just don't have good information. We have a lot of misinformation. And so this tool really removes the cumbersome nature, the difficult. They can go do this or figure out how to do this locally, but we can do this nationally now for pastors, and we do the hard, cumbersome, difficult work, but we just give them a good tool to motivate, and it's incredibly exciting to see what these pastors do.
You know, pastors, as you're going to see in the video in just a moment, when I was a pastor, I asked our financial secretary to give me a pie chart to show how many of our folks, I didn't want to know who they were, but how many of our people gave $5,000 or more? How many of our people gave $1,000 to $5,000 in the course of a year? How many people gave $100 to $1,000? And then how many gave less than $100? How many gave nothing? And I was shocked to discover the first time we did that over half of our congregation gave nothing. Now, what I did was I put that pie chart in our handout on Sunday morning, and I simply said to them, I don't know who falls in what category, but here's the shocking reality. Half of you aren't giving anything. Now, if you need a pastor for a time of death, if you've got a child that's in trouble, if you need us for any reason, whether you give $0 or give $10,000, we're going to be there because we love you. But once our people saw in black and white that pie chart and began to say, well, you know, I fall in this category, our giving went up measurably over the next couple of weeks. Now, effectively, that's what this tool will do. John, set the video up and then let's watch it.
This video will give you just a summary of what's required and why we're doing this and kind of our heart behind it. So would you watch this with us?
Gentlemen, if you'll cue up that video, let's watch that.
Acts 20:28 instructs church leaders to be careful and pay attention to themselves and to the flock that the Holy Spirit has made them overseers of. I believe that the church is the only hope for our country. The reason for that is because Jesus is the only hope, and Jesus gives gifts through the form of leaders in the church. One of the things that we do in the 2028 Pastors Outreach is give good information on the state of flocks to pastors. We match churches' membership list to the public registration and public voting data. This can be done already individually. This can be done by churches if they want to go to the county. But what we've done is given a pastor a tool to show him the percent in his congregation. Proverbs 27:23 says, be diligent to know the state of your flocks. The statistics in this country are that somewhere between 25 to 50% of Christians are not registered. Only 50 to 60% of Christians vote in a presidential election. Only 25% of Christians vote in a non-presidential election, which decides the Senate, the Congress, state houses, governors, and only 5% of Christians vote in a primary to determine who the candidates are. Part of the purpose of this tool is to give pastors good information. If they agree to the privacy policy, this is a free tool that allows them to know their church membership list. What is the real percentage of people who are registered and who are actually voting in a presidential, a non-presidential general, or a primary? What we want to do is empower pastors with good information because we know that pastors will lead. Pastors are called by God to lead, and when they get good information of the state of their flocks, we've seen them go into action. We've seen churches increase their membership involvement in civic ministry to be salt and light by up to 30% once a pastor engages.
I realized that the church had to be more than just come and hear. That we were to take our gospel, take our faith into the marketplace of ideas. And so I began to preach strongly on the need for people to change the culture. Gentlemen, we underestimate the impact we can have if we take our Christianity beyond the walls of our church.
One of the incredible things about our nation is it's a constitutional republic. And a constitutional republic, we get to elect who governs us. We get to elect the people that are going to make decisions for our family, for our churches, for our businesses, and for our lives. What we want to do is get more Christians to be salt and to be light into our culture according to Matthew 5. When that happens, we believe that the proverb that says, when the godly rule, the people rejoice. When the ungodly rule, they go into hiding. We want more people in this country to rejoice. We believe there's a spiritual revival coming, and we want to play a part of that by getting godly people to get engaged in this process. Would you stand with us in the 2028 Pastors Outreach?
John, I get excited just watching the video. We have this is a baby that God birthed. It was His idea, not ours.
Yes.
A lot of work went into putting this whole idea together. One of the questions pastors all over have has to do with privacy. Membership lists are sacred, and I want you to assure the folks the steps we take to make sure that there's no abuse of their church membership list, that we're careful and have a history now of handling these lists carefully with great privacy.
We've had zero issues. We've run a lot of lists. I think we're up to 8, 9, or 10 states now that we've run these lists. Churches, most of them are under 1,000. Several of them are over that. Some of them are over 10, 20,000. And we've got a very strict confidentiality agreement with a national data company. We follow all the protocols so that no one gets this but the pastor. And he doesn't get anything but the percentages of who's registered, who's voting in the last 4 elections, primaries all the way through.
Yeah, no confidence is betrayed, even in the
right.
report. You won't know who on your staff is voting and who is not. You'll simply know the percentages.
That's right. And one of the challenges that we, or resistances that we have sometimes is the pastors want to do this, and they go back and their elders or deacons or board or whatever. Unfortunately, we've learned that if one person is against it, it can overrule 5 or 7 or 10 other people. And so we try to give good information, again, to do what we do to serve these pastors. It's a free tool. They're not paying for it. It's a privacy issue, but we go one step further. You can't even get the list unless you also agree, because we don't think pastors would ever do this, but we don't want them to ever say, hey, I know you're not voting and you are. We want them to, shepherd.
And pastors, one thing we've discovered is that a lot of churches don't have good lists. They know that grandma is a member of the church, but when we start comparing it to the voter files, it's often hard to do. But the reality is we work hard. We have a whole staff now to clean that up and give you good information. Now, John, we have 3 minutes. I'd like you to share the story of Mark Andrews, because this will excite everybody listening.
Mark, it's exciting on a couple of levels. He is a culture impact team leader in one of the churches that we have served in North Carolina. And his pastor gave him permission. It's one of the things that we integrate the Acts 2028 project into culture impact team ministries, and the reason for that is 2 is better than 1. They have a better return for their labor, their profit. And so he was doing all the work for his pastor. Pastor Jake gave him permission, and he set up his culture impact team. We ran the list, and they got the report, and they were very happy as they sat around as a leadership team and said, their registration was way over the national average, and so they were really, really excited. And then they turned the report over, and a very low percent had turned out to vote in the last presidential election. So that's what the Culture Impact Team ministry person did, Mark Andrews. But what the pastor then did is right before the election, he stood up and put the chart in front of the congregation and said, "Who are we fooling? This is not okay. This is the real similar to what you did."
In fact, they put it on the overheads.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so they had a 30% increase due to their pastor taking a stand and being served by a Culture Impact Team leader.
In fact, folks, there were about 10 churches in that particular county that had cultural impact teams that did the Acts 2028 plan. And we were able to statistically measure an increase in voters that turned out that made the measurable difference in the outcomes of elections up and down the line. There's no way of overstating how important it is that we have good information, that we then turn our people loose with that good information to be salt and light. John Graves will work directly with your church and the people in your church that you assign the task. We will do it with the ultimate amount of care and concern for privacy. But if you'll help us, we'll help you. And who knows but what, we won't see that revival we're all praying for. In 30 seconds, John, a final word.
I would say the biggest thing here is Georgia Barna said if 10% of Christians get involved, it would sweep the White House, the Senate, and the Congress because, as Tony mentioned earlier, so few Christians are turning out to vote, and we're seeing 3 times that. So if pastors get behind this movement, it will influence and change the culture to be salt and light. The believers will impact this culture.
If you're watching this on Saturday morning, I know you care. Help us make the difference in saving our nation. Tony, back to you.
Thank you, Rick. John, exciting. What an exciting tool that pastors can have. And of course, voter registration, voter turnout, a key component of our Culture Impact teams, but just one component. I want you to listen to some of the stories of those around the country who have become a part of Culture Impact teams, and they've seen their communities change. Let's watch.
My name is Kayla Paul. I'm 18 years old and I am involved in my Culture Impact team. I have been involved for probably 2 or 3 months, so I'm relatively new, but I love it so far. I see a lot of kids my age who don't know what's going on in the world. They don't know about ISIS. They don't know about what the president has done on issues and things like that. And it's really important for them to know. So I wanted to have a way to reach them, and I knew that I could do that through this team. I take petitions to my school. Fellow students sign the petitions, and I give them flyers, hand them out, and I let them know what's going on in the world. We are the upcoming generation. If we don't get involved, who will? If we sit in our hands, and if we sit on the sidelines, what's our future going to be? We're going to have no one to lead us. I'm going to protect the unborn. I'm going to use my votes to do good and to make sure that justice prevails in this world. Because if I don't do it, if I don't stand up for what my biblical values are, I'm not a very good Christian. I'm not living a life as a Christian.
Very interested in making a difference in the culture around me, my community, and doing what's best for our nation and even our state.
Our reason for being in the Cultural Impact team is the Word of God declares that we should be involved in the culture. It says we should be salt and light as Christians.
It's important to be involved in the Culture Impact team. First of all, as a mom, setting that example for my children, that they see us engaged in our culture. They see us caring about what's happening.
And Dad, it's easy to do. You can take some time away from the sports, you can take some time away from watching TV, and you can be a model to your family and just do it for your family, because you want to leave them a country and a place to live that still has freedom of religion, still has freedom of speech.
It's so necessary for this generation to get involved because we're the ones who are going to be taking over the country in 10, 20, 30 years. Not caring is a lame excuse for not getting involved. I think you need to care because it's about your future, and if you don't get involved, it's going to all fall to the wayside. And ultimately, if you're in a bubble and you're comfortable with the way you live and you're comfortable with your electronics and your TV shows and just sitting on the sidelines and not doing anything and thinking that that's going to go on for generations and generations to come, you're wrong. That's going to fade away if you don't fight for it. Then you're not going to have that safe, secure bubble that you've been living in for so long. Your comforts are going to fade away. And it's important because if we don't do it, who else will? We need to be the voice, the salt and the light, that city on a hill, standing up for truth and righteousness when no one else will. And it's not about politics, it's about standing up for righteousness and the Word of God.
Wow. Well, we have heard some encouraging stories from Culture Impact teams from around the nation. And we actually have the author of the Culture Impact Team Resource Manual, our own Dr. Keenan Curitan, a Vice President of Church Ministries here at the Family Research Council. Welcome, Dr. Curitan. And I want to invite Dr. Mark Harris, who is our Culture Impact Team trainer in North Carolina, to join us again. Gentlemen, welcome back to Free to Believe. Let me start with you, Keenan. If a church wanted to begin a Culture Impact Team ministry, I mean, where do they start?
Well, first of all, start with prayer, right? We need to seek the Lord about this to see that if this is the will of God for us. But if it is, and you sense that, then go to the website, cultureimpact.org, click on resources, and the first thing I would do is download this Culture Impact, launching a Culture Impact Team ministry in your church brochure. Check that out, and then after you do that, there's also a quick start guide that you can click on and download that is especially relevant in the 2016 election. And then ultimately, you're going to want to get the Culture Impact Team Manual, which is a pretty impressive book here. It might scare you a little bit, but the actual manual itself is about 29 pages, so don't freak out. It's a resource manual. You've got a lot of stuff in there that you'll refer to later on. But look at that first section, and that way you can get started.
And soon to come, the Culture Impact for Dummies? Is that book
right.
coming too?
That's it. Right. That's it. That's what we'll do.
I want to, Dr. Harris, I want to talk to you about this because we're very sensitive and focused on this here at the Family Research Council, in that when we go to a church about a Culture Impact Team, it has to have the pastor's blessing and permission.
Absolutely.
We do not encourage people without the permission of the pastor to begin to set up one of these Culture Impact Teams. How important is it that the pastor be a part of this?
Well, as a pastor, that's one of the great things I have appreciated about this process from the get-go. And one reason that it was very enticing to me to see that this was such an instrument that could be so effective. In fact, in North Carolina, the way we do it is we actually do a pastor's vision lunch first and present to pastors and share with a group of pastors what we are wanting to do, introduce the resource manual to them, and then actually give them a card and ask the pastor in the next 24 to 48, 72 hours to fill it out with the name of the person that they choose, that they believe can lead that team, send it to us, and then the pastor, in essence, is done at that point outside of just being a cheerleader. We don't want to create one more thing for a pastor to have to do, and I understand that.
And that is a key part of this, Keenan, is that it's not about putting something else on the pastor's plate. Rather, it's to come alongside the pastor to help him in his call to equip the saints for the work of the ministry.
That's exactly right. As a pastor for 20 years, I didn't need one more thing to add to the sermons I'm preaching, the committee meetings I'm attending, the funerals, the weddings, and hospital visits. I didn't need one more thing, but this is a godsend, and we're seeing these Culture Impact Teams raised up around the nation, making a tremendous difference.
Okay, so we have the blessing of the pastor. We have a team leader identified. What's next?
Right. What's next? We've got 5 things that I would recommend. First of all is, once you get that permission of the pastor, the blessing of the pastor, start forming and organizing your team. We've got job descriptions and skill sets to match that's already in that manual, so you just go look it up. Secondly, develop a mission statement. Pray and think that through with your church leadership. We got some great samples in the manual. Then thirdly, develop a budget, because what you do as a ministry, you ought to invest in financially, right? Support it. And then fourthly, set up a Culture Impact Center in your church, so there's a place for people to go for information and action, right? And then Fifthly, begin those monthly meetings and start some basic projects. And there's just the most basic project that I would start with is encourage your people to pray for elected officials. And we've got a great prayer guide for U.S. officials that you can download from cultureimpact.org. Click on the resources. You can pull that down. But if you've already got a team, you've got it up and running, you're doing that kind of thing, we got a lot more robust and aggressive strategy for that. And we've got a 12-month strategy you can download that really has to do with impacting the elections that are coming up. You can also get the Voter Impact Toolkit there, download that or order that helps you do a nonpartisan voter registration drive in your church so that you can do some voter registration, education, and mobilization.
And we encourage those culture impact teams to do that annually, just to make it a part of your church, your Christian Citizenship Sunday in July, where you do it every year, regardless of whether or not there's an election or not. All right, Dr. Harris, we've got these, the beginning steps. Make it a little more practical for us in terms of how does a culture impact team function within the church? Give us a case study.
Well, one of the things we always say to the pastor at the beginning is, how many of you, when I'm talking to a group of pastors, have a missions committee, you have a finance committee, you have a building and grounds committee, you name them, and all their hands go up. Have you ever thought about having a culture impact committee that could actually come alongside you, help you engage your congregation? So when we get to the training, I've got one question. I always tell them when I start that, listen, you need to realize that there's no exam at the end of this. And they all say amen to that. But then I say, but if I were given an exam, it would be a one-question exam. I always hated those in school, but the one-question exam, what is the role of the culture impact team? And it's 4 things: to inform, to equip, to alert, and to mobilize, period. To inform the pastor, and with the pastor, they inform the congregation. To equip the church family so that they can be better equipped to speak into the culture and speak into the issues and about the issues of the day. Thirdly, to be able to alert the congregation when issues that we were talking about earlier come up in Charlotte or wherever the church is located with their city council or their school board. And then sometimes you just have to mobilize and show up. Because if there's one thing that I've found political leaders can do, while they may not do everything well, they can all count.
Right.
And sometimes it's amazing how from that dais they will count noses for
Well,
and against.
and we have found, to that point, we've actually found that a lot of times, like this ordinance in Houston and in Charlotte, that it comes in under the cover of darkness. They don't
Yes,
publicize the
that's
fact
right.
that they're doing it, and
So
so
true.
our
You're
culture
right.
impact teams, one of the responsibilities is to monitor
Yes.
what's going on, whether it be the local school board, the city council, or the state legislature, so that the church can be informed when those moments of action are necessary.
Well, be that watchman. I mean, that's the beautiful aspect of the whole Watchman project, because the watchmen were to declare what they see and sound the warning. And we stress that as the culture impact team is to do just that.
And this needs to become a part of the church, not just in times of urgency or emergency.
Exactly.
You know, where you talk about the prayer points, you talk about just reminders of our Christian citizenship. I would encourage churches that have websites to have a little corner over there for your culture impact team, where information can be posted, that people can find that. Include it into your Sunday morning announcements. If you have video announcements, insert something in there. Maybe it's nothing more than a reminder to pray for our president, to pray for our Supreme Court. We've got some exciting resources available and more to come in the coming months as it pertains to informing your congregations. But you can go to the website cultureimpact.org, and there's a lot of resources there that have been developed for you to use. How are these catching on across the country? What are we seeing happening?
It's amazing. We've got over 5,000 of these in all 50 states now. And the cool thing about it is that we don't cookie cutter these things, do we, Tony? We let the Holy Spirit guide each congregation
And the pastor.
to see what expression that culture impact team is going to have in that ministry in that church.
What we do is we're not asking the pastors and churches to march under our banner. We're giving them the tools, and some call it culture impact teams, some call it Watchman Ministry, some call it Salt and Light. I don't care what you call it as long as you call it when it's necessary. We just want you to call Christians together to be the influencers that they need to be to transform our communities. And you mentioned one of our early culture impact teams, one of our churches that joined our Watchman network, is out in Chino Hills, California. And I don't have time to talk about all of the remarkable things that this culture impact team and church has done, but they have literally transformed that community.
Amen.
And we've got a video we want to show you of this culture impact team in Chino Hills, California. Let's watch.
Amen. Thank you. Excellent.
As a Christian, do I take Jesus beyond my personal Bible study? Do I take Jesus outside the four walls of my church? Hi, I'm Pastor Jack Hibbs of Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. In spite of the fact that the culture seems to be more anti-Christ than ever, yet more and more people are delighted to not only know the Word of God, but to put it into action.
My name is Gina Gleason, and I've been attending Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills for about, maybe 14 years. When I first arrived at this church, I was really blessed by Pastor Jack's teaching. He was encouraging the congregation to go out into the culture and to make a difference.
Your church wants to stand for truth. It is incumbent upon us as leaders to give them that opportunity.
I just was so fed up with Christians not speaking up on some of the important issues. I stood home from church service one Wednesday evening and wrote a letter to Pastor Jack and just poured out my heart and the vision that I had for what a culture impact team could look like in our church. And he asked me to lead the culture impact team.
And she has assembled a team around her. And that team, through her, they have their pulse on things that are going on.
We are the team that is reporting back to the congregation little changes that are taking place that many people may not even realize. And so we're able to report this firsthand to the congregation and to let them know how they can respond and impact and have influence on things like legislation, whether it's coming from the state capitol, Washington, D.C., even policies coming out of their own city council and school district.
She might say, there's this issue that's going on, and she leaves it with me. And the great thing about that is I now have opportunity for the Lord to speak to me on this. For example, the issue might be regarding abortion. What we wind up doing is we inform the body. She prepares an information sheet. It's posted on our website. It's sent out by e-bulletin to those that attend church here. There are handouts if it's urgent. All the information is given on the back. Who to contact. It's very, very self-serve for the person or for the flock to respond to. That's just the common culture of this church.
One of the great things about this ministry is that it appeals to all generations. We have adults and the youth all working together when we have big projects, petitions, voter registration, just an issue we're dealing with in our society. We're all working together, old and young. We had a situation in our city council where they decided that they weren't going to allow prayer in Jesus' name. When our church found out about it, well, we decided we were going to have something to say about that, so we printed t-shirts, passed them out, thousands of them, and people wore them throughout the community when they went to the supermarket or to the library. And even when we showed up at city council meetings, so the result was that the city council members noticed that people wanted to pray in Jesus' name, and they reversed their vote. And so now the result is we have prayer in the city council of Chino Hills. After all these years, looking back and seeing what the Lord has done in this church, I'm just really blessed because I know the Lord has had his hands upon us all this time. I had no experience in understanding legislation. I had no political science background. I wasn't an elected official. I was just a concerned wife, mother, and citizen. And I really felt that the church had to lend its voice to some of these issues that we are facing in our nation.
We are taking righteousness out beyond these walls, and we are no longer going to wait and sit back until our government abuses us. No, we're taking truth to them. God has called us to take a stand, and we're delighted to stand for him while we have the opportunity, the freedom, and the time to do so.
Persecution of Christians around the world.
We have to be bold, speak the truth. Family Research Council action, and they see that
Family Research Council has become the national organization that I have relied on throughout the years to educate myself and understand the issues. They want to come alongside churches like yours and like mine. They will supply you with resources, connections, networking, anything that you may need to grow your culture impact team. And whenever I'm training a brand new leader, I always point them to the direction of Family Research Council. I want to reassure you, you are not alone. If you have a passion, if you have a burden for the future of our nation and the path that we are on, take the step to get involved. There is help for you.
Wow, what an amazing ministry, and I just love the creativity. Gina Gleason, obviously we just saw her, heads up the Calvary Chapel Chino Hills Culture Impact Team. She is the Director of the Faith and Public Policy, which is the ministry there at Calvary Chapel in Chino Hills. Gina, thanks for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
It's really exciting, as we were talking about earlier, about how each and every one of these Culture Impact Teams takes on the creativity and the character of the church, and you guys really have impacted your community in a profound way.
I think so, and God gets glory for that. I mean, the creativity doesn't come from me. It comes from the Lord, and I'm constantly seeking Him on how to lead and how to guide this team and how to make a difference in our community.
And what's so exciting about this is that you, as you shared in the video, that your background is not political science. Right. You're not a student of the legislature. You weren't. You were just a mom who cared about your community. So I want you to speak to that, to those that are out there today, maybe for the first time hearing about Culture Impact Teams, and maybe their pastor has asked them to potentially lead. What would you say to them?
I'm sure there's plenty of people listening right now who felt or feel the same way I felt way back when I started. I'm just really concerned about the future that we're leaving our children. And I thought the church should play a role in speaking to these issues. So I did everything that I could to learn about what was happening, whether it's becoming familiar with what's going on in the state capitol or our school district, you name it. I just thought it was important for our community, our congregation, to know that there's a church that would speak to these issues.
Yeah, I just want to put people at ease. There are no fatal errors that you can make when you start one of these up. The only fatal error is not to do anything at all. You work through these things. It's with the resources available, as you made reference to. How would one go about getting started? As you did, just kind of walk them through that process of how they would start as they sit there today. Nothing in their church like this. How would they start?
Well, first, if you have that burden, prayerfully consider what that means and approach your pastor and ask him and tell him, explain to him what a Culture Impact Team and what it does, and assure him that you are not there to beat anyone up or to be hostile, or that you would do this with a loving, humble attitude, but that you would want to address some of these issues that you're facing in the community, in the state. And I just think that a pastor nowadays, especially considering all that we have going on in our state and nation, they may be more open-minded to it. And once he gives you the okay, and then you have this responsibility of leading the team, and you think, okay, now what? That's the big deal. That's where Family Research Council comes in play, because you have the resources. You have the handbook, which is a great resource. Even to me, after all these years, it's still a great resource for us to learn about the first steps that a Culture Impact Team should take.
Now, none of us like to go alone. It's always nice to have company when we do these things. How do you go about recruiting some other members of the congregation to join you in this effort?
Well, first talking to friends. And believe me, there are a lot of people within a congregation that feel the same way. So that's the beginning, maybe putting out an action alert, an announcement from the pulpit, something on the website. Get the word out, establish a meeting, and let's see who shows up.
All right, in a few moments we're going to have another question and answer period. So I just want to remind you to go ahead and send in your questions, because we're getting now down to the very practical level, so that you can find out if you got questions about one aspect of this. We've got the experts right here. So email your questions, questions at frc.org, or you can tweet them FRCDC, at FRCDC. But we've got another remarkable video of some people who were involved. But before we show that, I want to ask you one final question about this, and that is, as you've been doing this now for a number of years, I mean, you're a veteran at this. What would you say was the most rewarding aspect of your engagement?
There's been a lot of things, but I think that watching other ministries from other churches stepping up and influencing their community, I think that's been very rewarding to me. And you're going to show a video of one church that called me and asked me for help on getting started, and the result has been amazing. They've made a big difference in their community.
It's contagious.
It is.
Courage is contagious. Amen. When we begin to stand, others will take note and stand with us. Let's watch some of these real-life stories of Becky and Walter and how they got involved in culture impact teams. Let's watch.
Do you have pot shops in your city? Well, Becky, Jackie, and Scott had something to say about it when they tried to move into Yucca Valley.
If anybody wants to fight pot shops in their town, I think these are the things that are important. I mean, you got to be led by God first off. But second, if He stirs your heart and that's a passion that you have, social media is important. And then the other thing that helped me was going back on the history of the people that wanted to open the pot shops. Looking up their names, Google searching them. I mean, they were bringing people into our town who owned strip clubs all over in San Diego. This one guy was opening up illegal strip clubs in San Diego County. That's one of the men that they brought into our town council. Another one was just a big drug dealer that had just gotten busted. His name was everywhere. So all I would do on social media, on Facebook, was post those news articles. I didn't have to say a thing. I let the truth reveal itself. The city council hadn't heard from us. I mean, it just slid right by us. We didn't even know this was coming until that day in January. So since then, we now go to council meetings. I think since then I've only missed one town council meeting. And it's important to be involved. It's important to know what's happening so you're not caught blindsided. If we hadn't had our culture impact team in line for the last 4 years, we wouldn't have been successful doing this, because we wouldn't have known what to do or where to begin, but we had the resources because God had been preparing us. And I think for this, I really do.
Our church was amazing. We did flyers. Our pastor spoke from the pulpit against this bill, and everyone was picking up signs to put in their yards. Our color was yellow, and Yucca Valley was yellow. It was amazing.
And all the other churches rallied too. Yes. Which it's the first time in our community that all the churches were together on one issue. Everybody had been silent. The town council was silent. They weren't taking a stand. Nobody was taking a stand. This isn't something that people need to be playing with or dabbling in. But there are so many people that were afraid to speak out against it, though, in the beginning, because they just didn't think it was the popular thing. They had a lot of advertising. They had a lot of radio. They bought a lot of radio time, but we never did. They had several signs on the highway, but if you got off that highway into the neighborhood, every house had our little no on Measure X signs. So they may have had the highway or the broad way. We had the narrow way. Everybody thought we were going to lose. And even the sheriff told me, he said, Becky, I want you to win with every fiber of my being, but I think it's going to be 60-40. And I said, God knows. It was 60-40, our favor. But you know what? It was all God. It wasn't anything we had done. We couldn't have done this. Anytime that God stirs your heart, He's going to equip you. He's never going to leave you. He's never going to forsake you. There were days that people would come up and they would park in front of my house with cameras, trying to intimidate me. But the thing is I was never fearful. I never was afraid. I never felt alone. At the end of the day, there's always that joy and knowing that He is in our victory is in Him, and to God be the glory. My culture impact team is Jackie and I lead it together, and Jackie's kind of the wind beneath my wings. She's my anchor. She's the organizer. She keeps everything on an agenda. I kind of fly by the seat of my pants, but I come up with ideas. I can get us indoors, but then usually she'll take over a lot of times when we meet with assemblymen or whatever. Our husbands are really supportive. That's really a big deal. Yeah, our husbands. But yeah, people come and go, and I mean, it's just a God thing. I went through everything I had gone through in my past just to get through this right now. And that's what God just showed me, that everything I did in my past didn't go to waste. He was going to use it right now.
Wonderful. A culture impact team may be made up of just 1 or 2 people. So we come in all sizes, all denominations. It doesn't make any difference. A team of 1 or 2 people can make a big difference in a community. I'd like to challenge large churches to start their culture impact team and begin to influence their culture. And this way you're able to help smaller churches. And this is exactly how I met Walter Bratton. One day he sought out our church because he knew that we had influence and we were working to make an impact in our own community. And we started to work together, and so now for many years, Walter and I have been in communication with one another, helping one another, and it's a big blessing for me to be able to serve some of the smaller churches in our community. So please meet Walter Bratton.
My personal concern is the black church, the African American church. If only we would use our voice and our strength to affect what's going on. If you have a passion to do something about the cultural impact in our society, you can get your church involved so we cannot just be bystanders, but participants in doing what we can to stop these things from going on and happening.
One of the many things I love about Walter is his determination to actively continue to educate himself, and making sure that his pastor knows what's going on in our community, and making it easy for him to respond to some of these cultural issues.
The church body generally as a whole, they have their lives to run, they have jobs and children and other obligations, and for many of them, they just don't have time to keep up with what the issues of the day are, and the issues especially that affects them as Christians and their church. And so as a cultural impact leader, I just have taken on the job of gathering the information and then disseminating the information to our membership so that they can become informed. So when those issues do come up on a ballot, say, or on some type of discussion, they have an idea of what the issue is all about. I just like to give them the best information I can to show them what the issue is about.
One of the things I really love about Walter is his heart. It's very evident that this man loves Jesus and he loves people.
Some of these issues that we're facing today, you know, I think I can't just be concerned about me and my life. I have to be concerned about, number one, my family, my children, my grandchildren, and even generations to come, my great-grandchildren who I may never see. And I want them to grow up in I just don't want my grandchildren to be in I don't want them to grow up in a godless society. And I want them to know that I did whatever, as much as I could, to help them live a Christian life and serve God in a positive manner.
Wow, some powerful stories, and I think Walter there really expresses the heart of the culture impact teams.
I think so, and that's with most of the culture impact team leaders that I meet. We all share the same heart.
And it's not just about us. It's about those that are around us. Everybody benefits when the culture is impacted positively, whether they follow Christ or not. But it really is about future generations. Before we move on to some more of the practical applications here, I want to ask, are there any other stories of how your culture impact team there has impacted the community?
I have hundreds of stories, but I think one that really stands out is how we influence our school children in our area. We have this great program. It's called Release Time Education that any district anywhere in the country can implement, and you get buses and you take them to the school. You park it in front of the school, and you have a Bible teacher that comes out to teach the children Bible for, I think it's maybe an hour a week. And that's allowed by our U.S. Constitution. I think it's something that every school district should be implementing, every culture impact team, every church should get behind. So look into that.
And we actually have a resource for that, a pamphlet with information how you can start that. If it can happen in California, it can probably happen almost anywhere in the country, and it is based on a Supreme Court decision. So that's exciting. A lot of exciting stuff. I know a lot about what's happened in Chino Hills. But I want to move on now. I want to bring Hank Hankins on. Hank, come on in and join us. Hank is, actually, I know Hank quite well because he heads up the Culture Impact Team in my home church in Louisiana, but that's not all he does. He caught the vision and has the passion for Culture Impact Team, and he's helping develop some resources for Culture Impact Teams across the nation. Hank, welcome today.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you.
Oh. Let's talk about where we go from here.
Okay.
You've got a year-long strategy that we embark upon when we leave this gathering today.
One of the challenges that I looked at on a new Culture Impact Team is what will they do when they take the manual, which is as large as it is, when they take this manual and they walk out, what do? We've developed a 12-month strategy that will basically break down what can take place over those 12 months to effectively turn the country and culture back to God, how the church can engage. It's going to involve things from voter registration drive. It's going to involve things from getting out the vote. It's going to involve things from educating our church body. But it's a step-by-step guide, month-by-month guide. What are you going to do 4 months from now? What are you going to do 7 months from now? This guy will actually give you a direction, a foothold in being a productive Culture Impact Team.
So this kind of goes back to the old adage that how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
That's right. Amen.
So what we're doing here is we're breaking this down one bite at a time, 1 month at a time, and if you look, it could be overwhelming. And oftentimes, quite frankly, churches don't think about launching one of these until there's trouble.
Right.
And then you're launched into crisis. Don't wait. Don't wait until you have a crisis. Begin to plan now, and guess what? You actually might avert a crisis simply by your presence. So that's exciting, Hank. I appreciate the work that you're doing there in breaking this down so folks can use this one step at a time. Let's talk a little bit about voter registration as a part of the component of this plan. How you're proposing it, and how Gina, your experience in that as well.
I think voter registration is one of the first steps that we can take as a church body to change the culture within inside the church. You see, we not only have to change the culture outside the church, we must change the culture on the inside of the church. And in this, we've put down as far as resources that you would want to utilize, and obviously the first one's going to be your Secretary of State if you've never done this before. But our guide will show you step by step on what to do. We've also laid out an Ignite campaign. Ignite campaign is where we mobilize the church body to not only register to vote, but we also mobilize hopefully 100% of the church body to actually vote.
It's key. I mean, we've actually made progress in the last decade of getting evangelical social conservatives registered, but we still have a ways to go to actually get them to get up and go vote. And that's, if you're registered and you're not voting, it doesn't make any difference, it's not having any impact. What's been your experience, Gina?
Well, we've registered thousands and thousands of people at my church, but every church is going to handle an election year in a different way. So I think the minimum that a church should be doing is registering people to vote, absolute minimum. But at our own church, not only do we do these voter registration drives, but we hand out voter guides, which is allowed.
Right.
We also produce voter guides for local, school board, and city council races, and we've been doing that for maybe the last 7 elections or so. We send a questionnaire to the candidates and find out where they stand on some of these really important issues. We put them in a document and hand them out to our congregation, so that way they know exactly who they're voting for. And for the person that does not answer our questionnaire, kind of wonder why, right? And so we have educated voters going to the polls. And so there's a lot of other things that you can do. It just depends on how involved you want to be, but that's really impactful.
Hank, you've done the voter guides as well as candidate forums. You've hosted forums in your church, which is completely legal. to have, the church actually used to be the meeting place in most communities where people would come together. Why not make it that way again?
Again, it's a mindset that we have to change. We've got to change the culture, and so that the churches can understand, yes, we can engage and we should engage. And that's one of the critical steps that we're going to take. And it's not going to be a sprint race. It's going to be a marathon.
Right.
It's going to take baby steps, because the moral of our compass of our country is 180 degrees wrong, and it's going to take 1 degree at a time to turn it back toward God.
That's why it's great, this 12-step process. It's a recovery process, really, recovering our country. Break it down 1 month at a time. You can find out more about this. Go to cultureimpact.org. Okay, we've got some questions that have come in. Questions at FRC. You can send those in, or you can tweet them in at FRCDC. Okay. Gina, I'm going to give you this question. This comes from Jim. In leading a culture impact team, how do you keep it nonpartisan in a diverse congregation? The reason I want to ask you is because I've preached at your church, Jack Hibbs pastored there, I've preached there many times, a very diverse congregation. How do you keep it nonpartisan?
You have to work at it, because our society is so partisan nowadays, but you have to just make sure that the material that you're handing out is nonpartisan. And we're speaking about moral issues. We're not trying to say this party does this and this party does that. We are talking about life, marriage, you name it. But the church has the right and the responsibility to speak into the culture about that.
Yeah, and I'll just have to say, you can't be timid. There are going to be some who are going to complain about the questions. I mean, Hank, you see that? In fact, some who complain the loudest are the candidates. They don't like to be asked the questions. And of course, they have, some of them may have supporters in your church. So look, if you're making a difference, you're going to make waves, right? Just get used to that. But we have guidelines that will help you go through this, where you are completely covered legally. We don't advocate that you breach the law. There is plenty, and let me emphasize, plenty that we can do within the confines of the law. The fact of the matter is, we're not even doing that. So we've got those guidelines, cultureimpact.org. All right, let me ask you, this comes from Joe in Maryland via email, and I throw this up for both of you. What are some good questions and or statements to pose to lethargic believers that might assist in provoking them to engagement? Suggestions.
I'm always thinking about the next generation. I'm thinking about, seriously, what are we leaving our children? And when I think about what our nation's going to look like in another 5 years, another 10 years, another 20 years, it really does break my heart. And I know that it also grieves the Lord. So I think that as Christians, speaking into the legislature, the city council, we can make a difference. And we have seen that we have made a difference. So I want to encourage every church to do the same thing.
It is simple. If we don't like the way things are going, we have to change course. We have to engage. Simply sitting back, standing back is not going to do it. Mm-hmm. We've got to be bold.
Hank, let me ask you this one. This comes from Tony in Bighorn Canyon Community Church in Rapid City, South Dakota. At a local level, and I ask you this because I know you've broken this down within the Culture Impact team there in our church. At the local, how does a CIT become aware of new rules, legislative actions, and such as they're being considered? So, how do you keep up with what's happening at the City Council? How do you keep up with what's happening in the legislature?
Well, that's a fundamental challenge. And Tony, I'd like to recommend that you touch bases with your state family policy group and stay in touch with them. Let them know what you're doing. They'll partner with you. Also with FRC Action. That's a valuable resource to help you to understand what's going on within your state, and also to network with other churches that are like-minded.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this is where you have you share the burden. Right. As you can bring more in. But the family policy councils, and we have those in about 41 states, and we partner with them in our Culture Impact teams. And if you're in a particular state and we're partnering with your family policy council, that information will be in the back of the Culture Impact Team manual. In fact, most of these are co-branded with our state policy councils. And they will keep you up to date on what's happening in the legislatures. Sometimes in the city council, and I know we've done this, Hank and Gina, I know you guys are very good at this as well, even when it comes to the local school board, is kind of breaking down the responsibility, where you have a team that's tracking the school, a team that's tracking the local city council, and feeding that information back in.
And the result is we have people that come back and report to us things that are taking place. And when we found out that atheists, for instance, were suing our school district because they didn't want invocations, well, then that's the opportunity for the church to speak up and say, we have the right to have an invocation in our school board or our city council, and we get involved.
And sometimes it's coming alongside the school board officials who want to do the right thing but aren't quite sure what to do. And through the church, you can also let them know that there are legal resources available to them. As we've heard here today, they're not only here to represent the church, they'll represent school boards that are willing to stand up to defend religious freedom. But then the flip side of that, I know this is true in Chino Hills, where before your Culture Impact team actually helped change the makeup of the school board by replacing some members, you had the school out there actually promoting Islam. And that word got back to the church and engaged the Culture Impact team.
Well, the result of that was Pastor Jack put together a series of teachings about what Islam actually is, what they're doing in our school district, and the purpose was to educate the community, the parents, so that they're aware when their kids are coming home with material, curriculum that teaches something that is not healthy for our children. They were able to speak up and talk to the school board.
So now, instead of kids in the schools there in Chino Hills plotting out their pilgrimage to Mecca, they actually have an elective to study the Bible.
That's another result of the school being involved in monitoring
Amen.
the school district. Having one of the school board members that is from our CIT on the board, and he introduced curriculum for our high school seniors and juniors to actually get unit credit for studying the Bible as history.
As an elective. Are you getting the picture?
Right.
Culture impact teams can help the church transform the culture. Now, it's the gospel that transforms the hearts, but you can't stop with just changing people's hearts. We've got to show them how to change the culture and what's important in the values that we embrace. All right, I want to get to a few more of these questions. All right, how do we get American Christians to stand together at election time just like Houston pastors did in Houston?
I think that's always been one of the biggest challenges. We know that we don't have enough Christians going out to the voting ballot booth, and it's constant, it's on a regular basis, and not that Pastor Jack is talking politics every Sunday, but when the opportunity arises, he will address the issue from a biblical worldview with his Bible in his hand. And so the church, after all these years, has grown in their understanding of what a biblical worldview actually is. And so they take that with them into the ballot box.
And it just reminded me of something in the conversations I had with Pastor Hibbs after the June 26th decision by the Supreme Court. Because I know there's some pastors out there think, oh, if I do this, I'm going to have all these people in my church going to be upset, they're going to leave. I think it was 4 straight Sundays after that decision as Pastor Jack, in normal fashion, engaged the congregation with biblical truth on the issues. You were having to bring in chairs to accommodate the overflow of people who were wanting to know the truth.
Exactly right, and that happens on a regular basis whenever a major issue comes up. We have the media seeking out Pastor Jack to get his take on whatever the issue is. And the congregation, they know what Pastor Jack stands on, these biblical truths.
And as a result, you have people coming to the church. In fact, it's not people leave the church when you take a stand today. People are looking for a church that will take a stand, and they come in. In fact, I have a question that came in from Patrick. He says, I've had trouble getting plugged into a church, so I'm not a regular church goer, but I want to get involved in impacting the culture. What can individuals do to impact the culture? I'm going to take the first stab at this, and then I'll let you weigh in. I think first off, and this is kind of the heart of FRC, is you need to be in the local church. It is the church that has the keys of the kingdom. It is the church that has the ability to impact. And I understand the disappointment. I hear it all the time where we don't have churches that are challenging people, find a church. If you need help, let us know. We'll connect you with one of the over 10,000 Watchman churches that we have in our network in every state in the nation. We'll connect you with one of those churches that is committed to impacting the culture. You can make a difference.
Yes, you can. I tell you what, it takes prayer. It takes seeking God. I visited a church for over 2 years before I knew that God wanted me there, and the purpose there, as far as I believe, the Culture Impact team there. So you have to seek Him. And if you don't feel a peace in the church, then, you know, that's between you and God, but there are churches for you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, part of it may be going along. I know you've got a pastor who is engaged. You've got a pastor who's engaged. You might not have a pastor who's engaged. Sit down and talk with them first. Share with them what you've heard here. Direct them to the resources available to them. Encourage them to come to our May Pastors Conference here in Washington, D.C., our Watchman Pastors Conference. Maybe they'll catch the vision. If not, then maybe you do need to pray about finding another church where you can be a part of impacting your culture. I mean, look, the hour is late. I don't think we have a whole lot of time, and we have to make every moment count. We've got to redeem the time, for the days are evil, and that means wherever we are, education, whether we're in entertainment, whether in the media, whether we're a plumber, doctor, truck driver, does not matter. But our faith must go before us, and we must impact the culture around us. Gina, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Great
Glad
work.
to be here. Thank
Hank,
you.
Thank you for your work.
Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
it so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very much.
All right. All right, don't go away, because we're now breaking into our working groups. This has been great discussion. Destruction is what we're going to do to the darkness. Amen. And that's what you're about to do as you go into your work group and design your plans for your Culture Impact team. We'll be right back in 15 minutes.
Amen.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So we need to sustain this effort. Culture Impact team is critical to that. What are the aspects of the team? We heard so much information there. Let's go back over this. Let's talk about this. What are the aspects?
Well, I think some of the roles, just kind of going down bullet points real quick, that we heard: voter registration, monthly meetings, newsletter, communication is key, prayer. People need to pray. In fact, that's first and foremost, really. And then you need an intercessory team to back you up. Monitoring the school board meetings, monitoring the city council meetings so that we know what's happening locally. Letter writing campaigns. Our church has done some letter writing campaigns, very effective. Action alerts, being aware of what legislation is happening within the state and then letting people know. Local voter guides, editing. There's any number of jobs that can be done on a Culture Impact team.
So we need to find and assign folks to different tasks. So we need who's the communicator in the church, who's the reader, who's the researcher.
Exactly.
Do you know of those folks in the church that we can talk about? Any experience there at all?
I've found that if you publicize your needs and you have little, miniature paragraph job descriptions, and you put a time limit in there. We need somebody that can write maybe 3 hours a week or 3 hours every 2 weeks. It's not as scary as just saying we need a writer.
Okay. So we got to have a writer.
Right.
What about a reader? Somebody that reads everything that is being written about their community, because this is community driven, right? We want to know what's happening around us so we can engage and then influence. So we've got to have a reader. Maybe he's assigned to read the newspaper every day and then highlight the untruths that are being spoken on the issues. And then you've got to have a researcher to research the article, to expose the lies, and a writer then to write about the truth to the newspaper. That's where the letter writing campaign comes on.
One thing, Randy, that really stuck out to me is
I worked in a state legislature for a little bit, and a lot of times you'll find there's people that really want to get involved, but they don't because they're intimidated by the process.
Right.
And they just don't know how to do the really basic things. And I think you can apply that both at a statewide level and a local level. There's one of the state groups, FPCs, that's doing this. And they're just walking people through saying, hey, these are your committee rooms in the state legislature. This is how you write a letter. Here's how you address it. Here's who you send it to. This is how a committee hearing works. And I think you could apply that in a lot of ways to a local level. So when you talk about a researcher, I think just having somebody who can tell you this is what's going on and this is what we can do. This is where the city council meeting's at, or this is what the school board is meeting about, goes a long way for people.
Kenny, you were talking about doing Q&A at the church, calling a meeting, if you will,
right?
But bringing people together just to do Q&A.
Sure. I mean, a lot of the times on these issues, people may or may not know what they believe, but maybe they do, and they're not quite sure how to articulate it. And so providing a safe place, if you will, at church where people can come. Maybe it's a Sunday school, maybe it's an after-church meeting. If the church is willing to open up its facility for people to come in, ask questions, you could have a presentation. But we have found that the Q&A is really where people come alive. You get the most interesting theological and practical questions. How do I talk about this issue? I sort of know what I believe, but how do I talk about it?
So the pastor's going to lead some of that Q&A. Any other individuals we can bring in to answer the questions that the people have?
Sure, exactly. And, it's important that on a team like this, that we not think, well, I really want that to happen, but I'm not really an expert, right? I don't know how to do any of those things. There are other gifts that are also needed for this kind of a team. All of us know that person at church who's just really good at enlisting people and getting them involved in a team or getting them on board, that mobilizer. We need that person as well. So there's more here than just kind of the technical aspects of knowing the issues or monitoring the news or reading legislation.
So Dr. Keenan Cureton talked earlier about developing a brochure even for your Culture Impact team. Just to state what you're about, what the team does, and then that's a way to hand out a piece of paper to someone that answers the questions or gets them rolling. It at least shows a place where they could plug in and get involved. And then we work to provide opportunities for them to plug in. One of the things that's critical today is an IT department or a social networking individual that knows that inside and out, Facebook, the Twitter thing, and all of that. We need those individuals. I believe they're in the churches.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
That's a great way to bring in some of the younger people, I think,
That's right.
too.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Because they're the ones who know a lot more about that type of thing than what I would know. And they can have those tweets go out or post on Facebook and say, contact this person because this issue is coming up. And somebody can just feed that information to them so they don't have to be that researcher and that tech person.
Yeah.
But there's room in this body for everyone with all of the different gifts. But you don't have to have everything addressed on a CIT. As Gina said, it may be just one or two people to start off with.
Well, and that fits the church size then.
Yes.
All the churches are different. So the question is, what can you do as a church in raising up a Culture Impact team? Going to be different than Gina's team there at Chino Hills. And so make it applicable to your church. But the point is to offer an opportunity. Because I dare say, even in a small church, you may have all of those put together. You may have a researcher, a writer, a reader, an IT guy, a social networking individual. You may have all of that. But if you don't ask the question, if you don't raise your hand and give a vision for this, it'll never happen. They won't stand up.
And you could have friends outside the church that can help, that are,
from another church, maybe.
that are interested in the issues and want to get the information out. Next thing you know, you've increased the size of your congregation.
Well, Darcy, then that just points to an easy door into inviting other churches in
Right.
for a meeting to talk about a culture impact and the importance of them starting one in their church. And that's then where we work together in a community.
Right.
So that corporately, like they did in Houston, they went after a issue that was impacting everyone.
The
And we need
networking.
everybody at the table.
Right.
The networking is key.
Yep.
And you got to start now, right now. Don't wait, because trouble's around the corner possibly.
Yes.
And
you don't know when it's coming.
That's exactly right. And it may be going on. There was a church in San Antonio where near an Air Force base, and there was persecution happening quietly on the Air Force base. And it was not in the news. People didn't know about it, but it came to the attention of the pastor that someone in his church was being persecuted at Lackland Air Force Base. And Pastor Steve Branson stood up and raised this issue. And I don't know that he knew at the time how many people in his congregation were directly affected by that issue. Now, every church and every community is going to be different, but that's what leadership does. It opens the door for people who are facing issues. They hear, oh, church is where I can turn for help with this kind of an issue. And in that case, it produced a network of men and women who were facing similar issues, began to pray together, and took action together ultimately.
Wow, that story is on freetobelieve.com. The story is about Sergeant Monk, who was actually going to his church and was in that situation in the conversation he was having with his boys. His boys actually pushed their father, Sergeant Monk, to action and not be silent, which took him to Pastor Steve to ask a question about that, and it blew the top open.
Yes.
Wow.
So great. These issues are happening in our churches across the country. We, the team, bringing that to light in our church is critical for our involvement in our church.
It's important for our kids to see that too.
Absolutely.
You know, we need to stand up for our faith, and they need to see their parents and grandparents do that.
Right.
And one thing that stuck out to me as I was watching Gina is the number of years she's invested in that community.
Right.
And just not being, I think, discouraged if you start a team or do something like this and it doesn't change everything you wanted it to change overnight, because relationships take time. It takes time, I think, to build trust in your community. And so you might not win all the victories you think you wanted to right away, but developing that trust with the community long term, I think, will go a long way too.
Right.
Very true.
So true. One of the pieces that a researcher can find, and shoot, if anybody's watching the internet and plugged in anywhere along the line, you'll find things like the Barna Report, the researcher of our day. He recently came out with 12 issues that people in the congregations want to hear about. They want to hear from their pastors. And you've probably heard pastors say, I can't talk about the issues, they're too hot, people will leave the church. But I tell you, what I saw in that Barna Report was all the top issues on life, on marriage, etc. were in that top 12 that the people are dying to hear about. Now we can, in our research, see, this is part of what we can bring to the church as we write our reports, or to the pastor as we write our reports, so the pastor can speak about them, which will then engage or ignite a passion in someone's heart. It's sitting in the pews that Sunday to action. And that's what we're looking for.
Right.
Something you just said struck home with me. The pastor doesn't have time to do all of that research. He doesn't have time to read everything and so on. So if he has a person on a culture impact team who can help him with that process and just give it to him, like Pastor Jack said that Gina does for him, then it makes his job easier, and he can communicate then about those key issues.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I've seen in Pastor Jack is that he is so excited and animated when he gets to the pulpit, because he's coming armed with truth about an issue that's going to make a difference in his community. And then I'm sure he'll tell story after story of what he has seen in the last 10 years happen in his community and how his church made a difference. Because there is a team of people supporting him, and together they work to change their community. So this is critical. So what are the other things that we can do as a church, the other aspects, or as a team, the other aspects that we can stand up, identify, and launch people into?
You know, one thing we could do is begin to compile a list of resources that each of us has for things that are going on locally, things that are going on at the state level, the state group in our state, and begin to divvy up the responsibility for who's going to be monitoring local government issues. Perhaps there are people in our church who either serve in local government or are interested in it or read the news very carefully. They should be part of this team. Parents and others involved at the school level, whether it's in the PTA, perhaps there are people that would be willing to attend school board meetings and listen and monitor that. Maybe there's a team of people who would share that responsibility. We probably have teachers in our church who know what's going on in our schools. And keeping track of local events.
Yeah. Right. Well, Keenan also, what we can do is help cast a vision, if you will, of running for office.
Right.
You mentioned this earlier, Debbie, in the previous segment, that there are positions at City Council, the County Commissioner, and let's have conversations with those individuals that are maybe they are finishing their career. They've got these decades of experience. Now they're able to have more time to then run for school board, run for city council, and make a difference. We can be an encourager to those individuals and a support to help them go forward and make a difference in those positions. We desperately need them there.
That's wonderful. You know, Proverbs 21 says, the heart of the king is like a stream in the hand of the Lord. And that's such a great scripture to pray for our leaders and to create
Welcome back to Free to Believe. I hope you have found those
honors
working group discussions very helpful as you really kind of bring it down to the grassroots level of how you're going to make a difference in your community. Okay, we're in the home stretch. All right. Well, you're not excited about that? You're having such a great time. It seems like it's only been 15 minutes, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Since the last time you made a restroom break. All right. Here we go. All right. Before we go on, a couple of more resources. Again, I want to encourage you, visit the website, cultureimpact.org. All the stuff we've talked about is available there. Contact information, anything you need to know to get started with your Culture Impact team is right there. All right, a couple of resources we've mentioned. I do want to encourage you. The book, No Fear. It came out just a couple of months ago. This is stories that I've written, profiles of primarily young people who have stood up for their faith. We heard of Angela Hildebrand. There's others like that, Roy Costner, Lila Rose, that have stood up for their faith. It's an encouraging, quick read, and it incorporates biblical principles. It tells the stories of biblical characters who have stood for their faith as well. It's a great resource, especially for small group studies. Then, to communicate the message that you're free to believe, we actually have Free to Believe wear. Let's take a look at this. Pull that up on the screen. There we go. Hashtag Free to Believe. You can wear that around the community, let people know that you are free to believe. You can find all of that out as well. frc.org/store. frc.org/store, so you can shop online with all that Christmas money that you got. Okay. We still have a couple of candidates that we're going to hear from. Again, remarkable, the change that's taken place in our nation where our presidential candidates are speaking out on the importance of religious freedom. Let's listen.
Voting is not only fundamental, but it makes a difference who sits in that chair. In the White House, it makes a difference who our senators are.
If you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain about how things are going.
It's a privilege to vote.
Vote, and your voice is the one that counts and matters.
Well, it's only as important as the future of our nation.
It's our right as Americans to vote, and there are many countries where women and minorities cannot vote.
And because this is a government that was founded by the people and for the people, we each have a responsibility to take part in that.
You really need to step up and vote, otherwise you're just sitting there complaining and not doing anything about it.
It's very, very important
because one vote can make a difference.
What I tell my kids why they should vote. The reason why they should vote, because if you don't vote, you end up with a government like we have right now.
Hi, I'm Marco Rubio. Thank you for the opportunity to address you on the important issue of religious liberties. You know, it shouldn't surprise us, this all-out assault on our liberties, because we have a president that when he was a candidate the first time, he said that those of us who have traditional values are bitter people who cling to our guns and to our religion. And the result are policies that we see every single day that are undermining the religious liberties of all Americans. When I'm president, we will have no policies that force anyone to violate their conscience. When I'm president, we will have an attorney general, and we will appoint justices to the courts who will defend the religious liberties of all Americans. We also live in a culture that accuses those of us who support the right to live, who believe that all human life is worthy of protection. We're accused of waging a war on women. We live in a culture that says that if we believe that marriage should be between one man and one woman, they say that we're bigots and haters. When I'm president, I will stand up for those who believe as I do, that marriage is between one man and one woman, and that all human life is worthy of the protection of our laws. Abroad, when I'm president, we will have a nation that stands for religious liberties as well, to protect Christians who are facing genocide in the Middle East, who protect those jailed all over the world, like in China, for having strong religious principles that they seek to guide their lives by. And most important of all, we will have a nation that confronts radical jihadists and terrorists. We will find them and we will destroy them. And if we catch a radical jihadist, they're getting a one-way ticket to Guantanamo Bay. I thank you for the chance to address you at this critical moment in our nation's history. 2016 will be a turning point for America. It will either be the year that America chooses to stay on the path Barack Obama has put us on, and therefore we will be a great nation in decline, or it will be the year that we will turn the page, that we will re-embrace all of the principles and values that made America great, and we will make this nation greater than it's ever been. That's what we're working on. That's why we thank you for your support and your prayers. May God bless all of you. And may God always bless our country, the United States of America.
Hi, Rick Santorum. Glad to be with you, and thank you for the great work that you're doing and standing up and fighting for religious liberty. About 2 years ago, I helped produce a movie called One Generation Away that the Family Research Council was highly featured in. In fact, our good friend Tony Perkins. And it chronicled the assault, systematic assault, that we're seeing on religious liberty in America today. It's not just one assault. It's assault on chaplains in the military. It's assault on those who are in our schools and universities and college universities and political correctness. But the most virulent assault is coming as a result of the institution of marriage being redefined and the lack of tolerance and the insistence on not just acceptance, but conformity of people on this issue. And this is not going to go away. It's going to continue to fester and continue to cause problems as this issue starts to go out into the business community and beyond, and even into our missions and other organizations that are parachurch related, as well as the church itself. And so this was what we had to have vigilance and passed. The first thing we have to do is pass the First Amendment Defense Act in Congress. And as president, I will sign that act. And then we'll move further and beginning to undo that damage that the court did in doing something they can't do. The government can't change marriage. Marriage is what marriage is, even if government says it's something different. And it's important for the next president to take that challenge on, to restore the family, and just as importantly, restore our rights to believe differently.
Well, we are grateful for those candidates that participated in this in sending us their concerns about our first freedom, the freedom to believe, in what they will do to protect it. And we're seeing the implications of this worldwide. As America loses its voice for religious freedom here at home, it sends a message abroad. And we're seeing it. Today, as we celebrate the release of Pastor Saeed Abedini, it took over 3 years for him to be released. And what was his crime? He preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're seeing many Christians in faraway places who are literally losing their lives because of their faith in Jesus Christ. Now, I want to put today really in context, because we're here talking about the freedom to believe. And we have highlighted some cases of people who have faced opposition and persecution and challenges. But let's put it in perspective as we see what's happening around the world. Earlier this week, Open Doors USA released its World Watch List, and they are keeping track of the growing persecution of Christians around the world. Dr. David Curry, who is the president of Open Doors USA, was here just 2 days ago, and I did an interview with him about what is happening internationally as it pertains to religious freedom, and Christians in particular, and what we as Christians here in America must do to protect and stand with our brothers and sisters abroad. I want you to watch this interview that I did with Dr. Curry earlier this week. Dr. Curry, Open Doors USA tracks the persecution of Christians globally, and your report just released shows that number growing exponentially.
That's right. There's been an escalation of persecution of Christians around the world, and that ranges anywhere from harassment, discrimination in many countries, to the outright violence and martyrdom of many, many thousands of people.
Now, we're talking about a large number of people, and we're looking at numbers that are showing that this is almost doubling every year, the number of Christians losing their lives. But then we're talking about everything from, as you said, someone being beheaded to being discriminated in the workplace. This is spreading around the globe.
It's spreading around the globe. It's becoming more intense. And one thing I think we all know, and why I'm so excited about what you all are doing, is that this is going to be a growing issue everywhere around the world, because Christianity is an affront to what's happening. And we have to stand strong, I think, with our brothers and sisters around the world who are in intense pressure right now, so we can learn from them and so we can support them.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Curry. If America as a nation and Christians in America are not speaking up and advocating for these Christians who are being driven from their homes, losing their lives, who'll do that?
No one's going to do it. And sometimes people ask me, folks from the Jewish community say, why aren't Christians standing up for what's happening around the world to their brothers and sisters? And I try to defend them and so forth, but I think you and I both know there's more that needs to be done. We need to stand behind people who are being persecuted, but there's a devotional element as well. We can learn from people who are growing in their walk from Christ under persecution, because I think, and I think you do too, it's going to happen here. Maybe differently. It may be aggressive secularism, it may be a number of things, but we're going to see increased persecution in the West. It's coming soon.
Are you inspired as you travel the world and you work with these Christians to advocate for them, to meet their needs, to connect them with the church here? Are you inspired by their courage?
I am greatly inspired. Just weeks ago, I was in Kenya along the Somali border, walking with these people who are under pressure from Islamic terrorists every day. They had executions in their community, but their faith is strong. And so there's hope in the midst of that. Jesus is doing great things wherever he's lifted up, but we have to pull together.
Is there a correlation between what we see happening globally, this growth, exponential growth of the persecution of Christians, and what we see here happening domestically, where we see this rise of different type of persecution here in the United States, but this effort to silence Christianity in the public space? So that, my point being, if we grow silent here in America about our faith and the importance that it plays in our country, that sends a message overseas to these terrorists and tyrants.
I think it really does. The persecution in North Korea right now is different than what's happening here, but one thing is clear, and that is that the world is inhospitable to the gospel. We have to support each other, and really it's biblical. It's not just a political agenda. It has to be rooted in what Jesus said, what the New Testament said, a book, a series of books written by the persecuted church.
Right. Mentioning that as we close our time out together, Dr. Curry, and I thank you and the work of Open Doors USA, but you mentioned the New Testament, and Paul and the others wrote to the churches that were being dispersed out around actually the same areas now that are being persecuted They were appealing to them to help the persecuted church in Jerusalem. There's a sense that all the way back to the beginning, we have a responsibility to help our brothers and sisters materially and morally and spiritually.
That's right, to be together. The Bible says when one part of the body hurts, the other parts hurt as well. That's what we are, a body of Christ.
Your word to the church in America today.
Let's stand strong. Let's stand behind each other. We understand there are going to be difficulties and we're going to be sailing into a headwind. But if we understand the dynamics of persecution, we're going to be stronger in the future and we're going to be stronger in the present too when we support each other.
Dr. Curry, thanks for being here, and we're grateful for the work you do and honored to partner with you.
Likewise.
Well, understanding what is happening to Christians around the world puts the challenges that we face into the proper perspective. As we gather in churches from sea to shining sea, we're not faced with dying for Jesus. We're simply being challenged to live for Him. Let me underscore a point made earlier. If you and I, as Christians here in America, will not exercise our freedom of religion and demand that our government honor that freedom and protect it, if we continue down this path where our own government tramples upon our freedom to believe and live according to these beliefs, well, if we refuse to stand up and defend them here at home, there will be Christians, our brothers and sisters in faraway places, that will literally lose their lives because we're unwilling to live for Jesus. And we can only expect this to intensify unless we stand and defend our freedom to believe. Because here's why. If the terrorists and the tyrants in faraway places see that religious freedom is no longer a priority in American life, they will see that as a green light to continue the type of genocide that we see happening right now in the Middle East. You and I have a responsibility to speak up today, right now, where we are. I bet you never thought you could impact the world just by living out your faith right where you live, but you can. You are free to believe. And I hope that you will take that freedom and use it so that others might enjoy it. Well, pastors and Culture Impact Team leaders, we have come to the end of our time together. I want to thank all those across the country that have joined us. I want to thank Vision America and Dr. Rick Scarborough for partnering with us in this Culture Impact Team training. Look, there are many, many tools available for you. Just go to cultureimpact.org, cultureimpact.org, and all of this information is available for you right there. Now, you may be an individual watching and wanting to know what you can do, how you can make a difference, how you can take that first step. Well, as I told you, find a good church, but there's also material for you right there on the website as well, cultureimpact.org. Okay, I want to challenge you to be praying for our nation. Pray for the upcoming election. Pray for what your church might do in being involved and being engaged. And I hope that today has helped ignite the passion that you have to transform your community for Jesus Christ. Again, the website, cultureimpact.org. You can find all the information there necessary to make your Culture Impact team successful. Now, some churches are going to break down into one last working session as they put concrete plans together on the next steps for their Culture Impact team. But unlike the other times, I won't be back after the 15 minutes. I want to thank you for joining us and being a part of this Free to Believe, and I trust that you will join with us and all of us across this nation in standing for the freedom to believe and live according to those beliefs. Thank you for being with us, and God bless you.